This is Atomic Shinobi and today I am going to narrate second and final part of What If Naruto was trained by Deidara after Land of Wave arc. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
For Team 8, the following day arrived sooner than they had expected. Right after Shino, Kurenai had taken the final few hours of night watch. The black-haired Jonin abruptly woke up her 3 charges before it was even 6 in the morning. She gave them 15 minutes to gather their things and prepare for the return trip to Konoha by train. The surrounding woods were a mixture of gray and orange as the sun had just begun to peek over the horizon. As the 3 drowsy genin rose from their respective resting places, Kasumi and Fuki, the 2 captured former genin, were still asleep and firmly bound to a tree. Hinata wasn't as fortunate today as Shino and Naruto, who were able to overcome their drowsiness in just 1 to 2 minutes. Throughout the entire night, the poor girl had only slept for 2 or 3 hours. The current Hyuga heiress's skin appeared 1 or 2 shades paler than usual, and she had bags under her eyes. Her only concern was making it home safely. At least no one attempted to discuss yesterday's events with her, and the young Kunoichi was appreciative of the attention she got from her team. The girl had repeatedly relived her first kill in her dreams from the previous night, only to awaken sweating and with 1,000 thoughts racing through her troubled head. She would attempt to push all of those terrible visions into the back of her mind for the time being. Although it wasn't the best option, this problem had to wait until later because she was still on a mission. The 4 shinobi and the 2 prisoners were soon on the move after quickly packing up everything. The 2 male shinobi secured the group's rear after Kurenai and Hinata took the lead, with their prisoners following in the middle. Due primarily to the 2 civilians in tow, Team 8 had to travel more slowly than they were accustomed to. It was astounding because, just a few months prior, all 5 of the children were on par with one another because they had all attended the same academy. The 2 remaining dropouts had reverted to being ordinary citizens, but the 3 genin could now move and behave almost like seasoned ninja. No one was particularly eager to engage in conversation, so the entire 6-hour journey back to Konoha was spent in silence. Kurenai produced the mission scroll as the group arrived at the main gates and gave it to one of the chunin manning Konoha's entrance. After examining the documents, the ninja nodded in acknowledgement and handed them back to the jonin with the black hair. Following this brief process, the group resumed its movement, following their leader. Naruto's voice rose a few minutes later. "Where are we going, sensei? This isn't the way to the Hokage Tower? Did you forget the regulations how to proceed with captives? All individuals which are captured during missions are to be brought to the torture and interrogation department for throughout checkups and further questioning." Kurenai reminded her blonde pupil. When the 2 civilians learned of their imminent doom, the jonin saw them wince. With one hand rubbing his neck in shame, the Jinchuriki responded clumsily, "Oh, I knew that all along, Dadbeo. I, just wanted to make sure you knew it to sensei." The antics of their teammate forced Kurenai, Shino, and even Hinata to smile. The 2 Kunoichi had to hold back their laughter. The blonde had a strong sense of carefreeness, but he could also be a killer if necessary. He appeared sharper and somewhat smarter since his return, but occasionally, like right now, his old ignorance returned. The group arrived at their destination, the Konohagakure Intelligence Division complex, without much delay. 2 Anbu guards, however, appeared out of nowhere in front of Team 8 and their prisoners, preventing them from entering. One of the men in masks raised his voice. "Entrance for jonin and authorized personnel only. You should know the protocol, Kurenai-san." The woman with the black hair complained. Pointing to Fuki and Kasumi, she said, "Okay, but I have to deliver those to Anko." The silent Anbu disappeared in a cloud of smoke as soon as he heard the request. The purple-haired woman grinned when she saw who had been waiting for her, and they hadn't had to wait long for the snake mistress to show up. With a creepy smile on her face, the special jonin asked in a happy yet slightly unsettling voice, "Oh Kurenai-chan, you brought me new playmates?" Pulling out the mission scroll, the team leader threw it to the interrogator. "Just sign up their delivery and they are all yours." Only with a growing sense of gloom could the 2 civilian girls observe the interaction between the mature Kunoichis. The purple-haired woman couldn't have anything good in store for them. With haste, Anko glanced at the mission scroll. The snake mistress now appeared almost disheartened at her friend. "Shouldn't there be 3? You don't grow weak here. Chan. Don't say one of them escaped your team? I thought you said your little genin were better than that." After shaking her head, the woman with black hair produced a small scroll from one of her pouches and gave it to her counterpart. As she put the scroll containing Ami's body away, Anko said, "Oh, I understand. Probably Inoichi can secure some information from the brain. Anything else you need?" Team 8 Jonin. Sensei approached the special jonin and whispered something into her ear, saying, In fact, there is really something I wanted to ask you. The woman with the purple hair broke into a menacing smile. Enko approached the two prisoners and wrapped her arms around them, saying, "Sure, no problem. But you owe me a girls' night out for that favor." Enko ushered Fuki and Kasumi inside the building after saying, "Come on girls, we three have a busy schedule. Can't miss any of the fun, now can we?" Kurenai, meanwhile, turned to face her team and spoke to them. "The mission ends here, I will take the report to the Hokage myself. The rest of the day is free time for you, so use it wisely. After what happened I am sure all of us could need some time to relax. Remember tomorrow is our day off, so we see each other in 2 days. 8 a.m., training ground 42, hopefully as lively as ever." After the Jonin said her final words she turned toward Hinata with her gaze. "If one of you needs something you can always seek me out. My door is always open for you." After saying goodbye to one another, Team 8 members divided up. While Kurenai traveled to deliver the most recent report to the village chief, the three genin headed for their individual residences. After they parted ways, Naruto was traveling to the woods around the training area his team frequently used, where he currently resides, when he noticed something intriguing. The blonde genin had arrived at an ancient, almost abandoned temple along the route through Konoha's western suburbs. Normally, the Jinchuriki wouldn't be interested in such a structure, but just above the entrance portal, a sizable spiral was carved into the otherwise blank stone. Although the same symbol appeared on all of Konoha's standard shinobi attire, Naruto saw it as having far greater significance. At least since Deidara had told the blonde boy about his heritage and the once famous Uzumaki clan. The demon host's only option to quell his curiosity was to enter the shrine. Only a strange room with about 30 eerie masks hanging on one wall caught his attention in the temple. Although Naruto felt uneasy around those antiquated artifacts, he was unsure of why. He found the Uzumaki spirals that were literally strewn all over the shrine's walls to be more fascinating than the masks. This building must have been connected to his clan, whatever it was. The blonde genin looked at the rest of the complex after inspecting the temple. A huge wall that was nearly 2 meters high encircled the entire space, with the sole aperture in the massive barricade directly in front of the shrine. There was a sizable open field behind the temple, and another structure was situated at the boundary wall. The house at the end of the clearing was slowly approached by the blonde. It was small and featureless in comparison to the shrine. Its front was decorated with 4 windows and a door. The wooden door had fallen onto the porch after the hinges had long since failed. There was nothing but chaos inside the building, including rotten and damaged furniture and signs that some untamed animals had taken refuge there. In contrast to the temple, the 4-room house appeared to have been occupied for a very long time. There was an old well on the left side of the house that was still capable of producing water. Naruto came to the conclusion that the building most likely belonged to the shrine's caretaker. Following a thorough inspection of the entire complex, the blonde was certain that both building structures were largely intact, as was the wall enclosing everything. Furthermore, he was certain that whatever this was, the Uzumaki clan owned it. Konoha's first genuine link to his departed ancestors. For Naruto, the choice wasn't difficult in the end. He would move in and work to restore the complex to its former splendor. Even though it was a massive undertaking in and of itself, the place was dilapidated even though nothing appeared to be beyond repair. At least he had a day and a half to start patching up the worst areas and move his extra stuff in here. The Hyuga heiress had devoted the majority of the day to reflecting on the events of her previous mission after Kurenai had dismissed Team 8 yesterday. She had felt compelled to examine the entire situation and then determine whether or not her actions were appropriate and warranted. If not, the guilt she experienced would never go away and would most likely break her in the end. Her first thought was whether she had reacted so violently and harshly just because Naruto was in danger. Had she done the same for her sensei or Shino? The kunoichi was well aware of her intense feelings for the blonde boy. When she was younger, they began as admiration but quickly developed into a full-fledged crush. You could say that she was ecstatic to have the Jinchuriki back in on her team. However, since then, things have changed. She first heard about the boy's heavy load, then witnessed his brutality on missions when his teammates were in even the slightest danger, and ultimately, they became friends. She was certain that her current feelings still went beyond friendship. But what was it she wanted now, and how much more were they? As of right now, the Hyuga girl was clueless about the answers to that. At the moment, her love life was not the most important thing either. However, those were not her primary concerns. If Kurenai or Shino were in danger, would she kill someone in the same way? She was surprised to discover a simple solution. Yes, without hesitation. Like Naruto, Shino had become her friend. In fact, those two were most likely the only true friends she had. Furthermore, Hinata had known Kurenai for a long time. Even before she became her sensei, the woman had looked after her. There was still a question to be answered after she had personally attested that she would have done the same for any member of her team. Was a fatal blow really necessary? The Hyuga girl mentally reenacted the event innumerable times. After Amy grabbed the kunai from beneath her and lunged forward, Naruto knelt down towards the fallen enemy. In the final scene, she stopped the attack by slamming her Juken powered palm into Ami's chest. Naruto would have been struck directly in the torso, most likely through the intestines. The attack might have been fatal, depending on how deeply the kunai would have been driven into the blonde. Hinata shivered alone at this thought. Although she couldn't be certain, there was a chance that Amy had intended to murder her teammate. The blue net was almost positive that her reaction was appropriate after debating the entire situation for hours. Some doubt was still there, but it wouldn't disappear so quickly. However, there was some relief in knowing that she had taken the required action. Hopefully, the remaining uneasiness and guilt would lessen over the course of the following days and weeks. She couldn't erase such emotions in a few hours, even if she did everything perfectly. The second night she slept after killing Amy was at least marginally better than the first because of all the new information she had learned. Even though she still had some horrific nightmares and woke up multiple times because of them, the girl managed to get more hours of much-needed sleep than she had the day before. She therefore appeared nearly normal today. She was still a little paler than normal but otherwise fine. Hinata didn't want to think about those terrible incidents anymore on her day off. She therefore made the decision to practice some gentle fist katas alone in one of the Hyuga dojos within the clan compound for the majority of her free time. When a branch member arrived at the training location, it was nearly noon. The man bowed to the young woman before continuing. Hiyashi. Sama requested your presence in his study room, Hinata. Sama. The blue net quickly went back to her room and changed out of her sweaty training clothes for some new ones. The blue net was in a big hurry because she didn't want to offend the head of the Hyuga clan by making him wait too long. The heiress came into her father's study a few minutes later, nearly gasping for air, but she soon regained her composure. Hiyashi Hyuga's severe gaze pierced the girl's body as soon as she stepped into the room. You might think that those icy, pupilless eyes could peer right into your soul, analyze your very essence, and read all of your darkest secrets like a book. Hinata lowered her own eyes to the ground as soon as she saw her father's intense stare. Additionally, it was difficult for the girl to control her regular nervous behaviors, such as fidgeting. Why? You wanted to see me, T.2.san. Hiyashi made a brief pause before continuing, saying, in fact, today I was informed of your last mission. Your actions surprised me greatly, daughter. The young kunoichi asked, Did I do something wrong? Unsure of what to anticipate from her father. Long ago, he had considered her a failure and a disappointment. These days, the clan leader would spend his days training his younger daughter and dealing with politics, largely ignoring Hinata as if she didn't exist. The meek girl's response was, hardly, for the first time in years I must say no, my opinion on you was that you wouldn't be cut out to be a useful ninja, you were always too kind-hearted and weak. However, it seems I was at least partially wrong with my assessment. While your opponent wasn't worthy of anyone who would call himself a shinobi nor a real Hyuga, your actions still show that you probably possess some potential. The more her father spoke, the more stunned Hinata became. The entire tirade would have sounded demeaning to anyone else, but to the girl, it was practically a compliment. Was it true that Hiyashi Hyuga believed his oldest daughter had done something right? Even though it was something new for her, she could see that he was merely very surprised and not impressed by her actions. The clan head lowered his eyes to some papers on his desk and began to scribble, saying, probably one day you will be worthy of the name Hyuga and will bring honor to the clan. This would be everything. You can go now to continue with your training. The young heiress was lost in thought as she made her way back to the training ground. Although there was still a bitter aftertaste, the conversation with her father was the nicest she had heard him say in many years. It would seem that the speech sounded more like an insult than any sort of praise overall, but Hinata wasn't perplexed by that. The girl finally realized why she was experiencing this odd sensation. She nearly received praise for killing someone. Her father believed she was proud of taking someone's life, but she wasn't. She didn't want it, but she was finally getting some recognition from her family. Was it truly that strange, the Hyuga clan? Team 8's free time went by quickly, and today all three genin were already waiting for their sensei to arrive in the clearing that was training. Ground 42. Shino was the one to break the ice between the teammates, which was unusual. My observations of you indicate that your condition has improved since 2 days ago, Hinata. Were you able to sort out what was troubling you during our short leave from shinobi routine? The girl was a little taken aback by the questions, but she wasn't offended that the Aburame had brought up the subject. It only demonstrated how concerned her teammate was about her welfare. The brunette smiled slightly after she responded, "Thank you for your concern, Shino. I can't say that everything is alright again, but it certainly is improving slowly." From the sidelines, Naruto silently observed the conversation between the two squad members. The fact that Hinata had already made some progress toward recovery from the ordeal pleased the boy. He was able to empathize with her because, like most shinobi, he had experienced something similar following his first kill. Only those who lacked true feelings experienced nothing, not even when they took their first breath. However, as the blonde Jinchuriki heard rustling noises coming from the area, all of those thoughts were swept away. His voice was low enough that only his teammates could hear him ask, "Did you two notice it too?" All three genin tensed as Shino and Hinata nodded slightly. There was always a chance of an attack while they were still in the village. That was a risk of the ninja life. To avoid warning potential adversaries, none of Team 8 engaged in combat. The Hyuga girl immediately activated her bloodline limit to look around for anything unusual. Soon the brunette's face took on a look of confusion. The girl gestured to a cluster of bushes on the edge of the training area and said, "N. Naruto.kun, over there are 3 children hiding in a cardboard box painted like a rock." The blonde recognized who was observing them right away, while his 2 teammates were perplexed by the entire circumstance. He yelled across training, "Ground 40. 2, Konohamaru, you can come out, we know you are there." From behind the green shrubs came a gray reek and a tiny explosion. 3 kids, 2 brown-haired boys and a girl with slightly orange hair, stepped out into the smoke. They were all wearing goggles that resembled the ones Naruto wore in the academy, and the 3 of them were coughing a lot from breathing in the fumes from the explosion. The young girl reprimanded her accomplice, saying, "I told you that was too much gunpowder, Konohamaru." Despite skillfully ignoring her charges, the boy's focus was entirely on Naruto. As he spoke, the Sarutobi said, "Exactly what I expected from the man who is my rival." The bug user asked his teammate, "Naruto, would you mind explaining why you made a little child your arch enemy? Because I expected better from you." The blonde boy's face showed a slight frown. The Jinchuriki waved his hand at the boy with the brown hair and the enormous long scarf, saying, "Man, you get this all wrong, Shino. This here is Konohamaru Sarutobi, the grandson of the old man Hokage. The other 2, although I have no idea, never seen them before." He replied with a shrug. "This are Moegi and Udon, my squad members, Ni-san," the young Sarutobi boy proudly replied. When the blonde genin was approached, the 2 shouted an enthusiastic, "Nice to meet you, leader." The boy with the brown hair was decked on the head by Naruto. He then assumed a small contemplative pose and said, "You are only an academy student, you don't have team members. Shouldn't you be in one of Iruka-sensei's lessons by now?" As if at the same moment, an angry academy teacher stormed the clearing and a shout of, "Konohamaru Sarutobi," rang out across the training ground. Without even flinching in response to the boy's cries of agony and indignation, the man grabbed the young criminal by the earlobe and dragged him away before anyone could respond. Team 8 was left in confusion as the other 2 kids did the same. Kurenai came a minute later. After receiving a series of angry head shakes from her genin, she asked, "Do I even want to know why Iruka-san forcefully pulled the grandson of the 3rd away from here? Anyway, there is something important we must discuss and it concerns this team." Naruto, who was a little scared, asked, "Do we have a problem, Kurenai-sensei?" The blonde boy's response was, "No, nothing like that, I just came to a conclusion over the last 2 days, that is all." It was also true that the black-haired Jonin had spent the previous 2 days struggling to make a decision. She had to choose whether to nominate them or deny them entry for the Chunin exams, which were just a week away. Nearly every requirement she set for herself was met. Hinata and Naruto had both taken their first lives after completing 3 C-rank missions. She was almost certain that the always sensible Aburame would handle Shino's first kill, so she wasn't overly worried about it. In 5 days from today on the annual Chunin exams are held. This time they will be hosted right here in Konoha, and I was contemplating on nominating Team 8 to participate. That is if you 3 want to enter, of course. The woman told her genin teammates. The first to respond was Naruto, who leapt to his feet in ecstasy and gave his sensei a fierce hug. Only then did the boy realize what he had done and release his hold on the Jonin. "You really mean it? We are so going to be Chunin, Dadbeo." He spoke apologetically. "Sorry sensei, I was just so surprised and happy." The timid Hyuga heiress asked, "Hey, are you sure we are ready? We are only rookies after all, sensei." Kurenai's voice conveyed to the 3 genin that the woman was completely sure of her choice, and who were they to question their superior? "There is no need to sell yourself short. I am really proud how far you three came since I have taken over your training. Surely I wouldn't nominate you if you weren't ready? Kurenai said. 2 days later, Team 8 was taken aback by who showed up with their sensei in the morning. Kurenai was followed by Anko, who smiled slightly at the 3 children as the 2 older kunoichi entered the training grounds clearing. Naruto turned to look at his Jonin sensei accusingly. What is the crazy snake lady doing here? His right cheek was nicked by a kunai that sizzled through the air before he could even respond, and tiny drops of blood slowly dropped to the ground. The snake mistress answered in a cheerful voice, that is Anko. Sensei for today, brat. Kurenai. Chan here asked me to show you some tricks. The blonde's quick, sarcastic response was, understood crazy snake sensei. The special Jonin moved behind Naruto and used her tongue to lick his bloody cheek in a flashing display of speed. What was that, Foxy? Kurenai had made the decision to put an end to any hostility between those two before it got out of hand. Naruto, Anko, you both stop this now. Be good, both of you. The blonde genin and the purple-haired woman immediately parted ways after the squabblers heard the black-haired Jonin's silent threat, separating themselves from one another and turning away from one another. Naruto begged in a somewhat agitated and almost frightened voice, yes sensei, but please keep her pets away from me. Currently I don't plan to become snake food anytime soon. You don't have to fear anything, Anko will behave. She is your sensei for today, but I will watch everything and intervene if something goes out of hand. Kurenai reassured the genin team. Although it was a good drill, the 3 rookies likely experienced some trauma from the snake summoner's previous training exercises, which the Jonin were aware of. Anko was prepared to begin her team exercises a few minutes after both sides had sufficiently cooled down. Hopefully you 3 know about KI, also known as killing intent. Today I will give you a demonstration of my own KI and will get you slowly accustomed to it. When they heard those words, all 3 genin appeared to tense. The strongest form of raw killing intent could even kill those who were too weak-willed to resist it. The aura that a seasoned shinobi could create was something that should not be taken lightly, and it could instill fear in lesser ninjas. Nevertheless, Naruto became intrigued by the subject and felt compelled to pose a query. So you are going to show us how to use it as weapon to scare our enemies, Anko. Sensei. The blonde received a hearty laugh in return. The purple-haired woman let the words sink in before receiving the anticipated frown from the Jinchuriki. Show you? I doubt any of you has it in you, at least not now. Once you have a few years more of experience, though, you should be able to easily do it. For the next hours I will just flare some KI for a few seconds and then let you recuperate from the experience. Over time the amount of killing intent will slowly increase though. And they were doing just that, as she had stated. Anko conjured up the dreaded aura and directed it at Naruto, Shino, and Hinata. She then let them rest for a minute or two before beginning again. Under Kurenai's silent watch, the 4 continued to do this for nearly 2 hours. However, the snake mistress was annoyed by one thing. The blonde demon host didn't even bat an eye, but the Aburame boy and the Hyuga heiress were clearly shaken by her attempts. Anko continued to raise her threat level while keeping her eyes on the Uzumaki boy. The fact that said genin looked directly into her eyes, almost mockingly, was something she hadn't expected. She was done. She had had enough. She grew more and more intent on killing without thinking. She was quite impressed by Naruto's achievement, though, as he didn't even begin to perspire. An irate Kurenai yelled, "Stop that, Anko, look what you're doing to them." The snake mistress became aware of what had transpired at that point. Both of his teammates had fainted, but the blonde boy was still standing unscratched. She apologized, "Sorry, Cure. Chan, I wasn't thinking. Hey kiddo, how can you handle this so well?" Naruto asked. Yano, my old team had 2 encounters with Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist. He wasn't sure if the hidden leaf were aware of this, but the purple-haired woman nodded, so he went on. Sorry to say that, Anko. Sensei, but this guy was much more scary than you. Even Anko knew that an ex-member of the notorious 7 Swordsmen would be more dangerous than her, but in normal circumstances, she would have taken this as an insult. In actuality, the blonde's ability to handle the dished-out killing intent was not solely due to Zabuza. Flashback: the young Jinchuriki had met the artistic missing nin Deidara approximately 3 weeks prior. As the 2 blondes sat around the campfire, the bomber asked, "Say Naruto, what do you know about killing intent?" Naruto's counter question was, "Isn't it the scary aura ninjas can create to shock their opponents? If I remember right, Zabuza did something alike during the wave mission." The former IWA shinobi readily grasped the implication, since the genin had told his new mentor everything about his previous assignment and how he got to Lightning Country. Exactly, many shinobi use this to their advantage. So for the next 2 to 4 days I will expose you to strong dosages of my own killing intent to harden you. The Konoha genin was nearly continuously surrounded by a powerful aura that foretold death for the following week. When Deidara flared his Ki on the first day, he passed out numerous times, occasionally with foam leaking from his mouth. A little too much. However, he eventually managed to dismiss it without experiencing visions of his own demise. Additionally, he was able to endure the full force of the missing nin by the end of his treatment. Kai flashback training went on for 2 more hours after both of his teammates woke up, followed by a brief lunch break. Anko pulled everyone to a dango stand, which is her favorite restaurant. After their meal, it was evident that the purple-haired woman enjoyed this dish as much as Naruto enjoyed ramen. The purple-haired special Jonin spoke up after everyone had returned to training. Ground 42. So now we will do something completely different. One of my fortes is torture and interrogation. Furthermore, one part of the Chunin exams normally consists of something related to information gathering, so I have decided to introduce you to a bit to my handwork. Fearfully, the Hyuga heiress said, "Why? You don't intend to use us as visual aids, Anko? Sensei, d.doy.u?" She smiled reassuringly and said, "No, not in the slightest. A few of Blondie's solid clones should be enough as demonstration material." Naruto wasn't sure his copies were the appropriate test objects, so he asked, "But they pop under physical stress, are you sure, Sensei?" Additionally, he wasn't particularly excited about the experiences he would have after they were destroyed. Anko had to laugh as she told the shocked genin, "Thank your main sensei for that." She was against the idea to bring some real-life support. There were a few prisoners in the Anbu cells that would have worked out quite right for this presentation, but Kurenai was against my idea. Team 8 learned how to obtain information from unwilling subjects from the special Jonin almost until the sun was finally setting. Some involved gory scenes involving kunai and other sharp objects, while others involved straightforward strategies, and finally, how to employ aburame insects and strategically place juken strikes to get the unfortunate victim to sing about anything you want to know. Naruto would have some disturbing nightmares about Anko, kunai, and his teammates' clan techniques that night. Finally, it was time for the Chunin exams. Team 8 was standing in front of the academy, which was where the first portion of the test would end and where their shinobi journey had begun. As a courtesy to their sensei, they arrived nearly an hour early. Kurenai Yuhi was well known for being on time, in contrast to Kakashi Hitaki, and her 3 charges had inherited this quality. Since the entire exam was unfamiliar to them, the genin decided yesterday that it would be best to arrive fairly early. It was always best to be adequately prepared. Hinata Hyuga, Naruto Uzumaki, and Shino Aburame were standing side by side. Their postures and expressions conveyed resolve to all onlookers. The first to move was the blonde Jinchuriki, with his 2 teammates trailing slightly behind. The 3 of them are making their way slowly to the entrance of their most recent challenge. The 3 genin of Team 8 were moving almost unconsciously through the deserted hallways of the Ninja Academy in Konoha. They were very good at hiding the slightest signs of anxiety and tension because they knew it was best to avoid giving your enemies a target in the first place. The silence that persisted between him and the other 2 members of the squad was broken by Naruto. "Kurenai said 301, didn't she? The room in which the first round of the exam is held, I mean?" With the same monotone voice he used almost exclusively, the Aburame boy replied, "Hopefully this is just your way of breaking the ice. Because you are the one leading us around the building and I wouldn't like to follow someone who didn't even know how to reach the right destination." The Hyuga heiress let out a little giggle. Though both young men had heard it clearly, the final 4 words were added a little hesitantly and hardly above a whisper. "You should have faith in your companions, Shino. And Naruto-kun surely know where we are going, at least I hope." The blonde Jinchuriki let out a little moan. He put on a fake frown, turned around, and glared at Hinata and Shino. "At least the silence is broken between us. The quietness was getting on my nerves. However, you 2 didn't need to make fun of me, Dadbeo," he said. He said, "My sense of direction is extremely sharp. I know very well where we are going." And then he looked forward once more before marching away. The boy with the brown hair and the blue net trailed behind the Uzumaki suit. They both understood that Naruto wasn't upset with them. It was just his typical way of playing with his teammates. In addition, his effort to improve their relationship had been successful. The 3 of them were now more relaxed than they had been just a short while ago. The 3 rookies soon passed a double door that was guarded by 2 teenage shinobi who had a menacing appearance. While the other had 2 weapon handles sticking out from behind his back and long, spiky black hair. The first had brown hair and wore a bandana style headband. The number 301 was displayed on the wall near the entrance. The genin paused, glanced at the scene for a moment, and then began to move forward without looking back. After them, one of the two guards yelled. He then laughed ferociously and scornfully, saying, "Already giving up on the Chunin exams? What else is to be expected from newbie ninja?" Shino halted his motions, but his two companions persisted. The bug user then gave the speaker a bored look as he turned his face in that direction. "I beg to differ here. This meager excuse of a genjutsu you two are using as an affront. Did you really believe the students of Konoha's illusionary mistress are going to fall for something so unsubtle? Especially when one of my team members has the Byakugan and my Kakaichu could sense the vibrant chakra still lingering in the air all across the hallway?" Both shinobi's eyes were wide open as they gazed at the Aburame, primarily due to the ease with which he ignored their attempts at deceit and direction. The stoic boy said, "Now if you two could excuse me, my team is waiting for me, goodbye," and walked away from the two guards. The adolescent with the black hair asked his friend, "Azumo?" His partner's solemn response was, "Yes, Katetsu." The now named ninja's voice hardly concealed his indignation as he asked, "Were we just now defeated by a couple of fresh out of the academy rookies in one of the most humiliating ways?" As he responded to his companion, the bandana wearing shinobi sounded quite dejected. "Sorry to say that, Katetsu, but yes. Those three made us look like we are the newbies here." The teenager with the spiky hair firmly stated, "So you know, this never happened, Azumo. This never happened." He was trying to persuade his best friend to forget the recent incident. Team 8 arrived at the actual room 301's entrance approximately 5 minutes later. However, the air began to shimmer around them before they could enter, and their sensei materialized in front of them as if suddenly, as if a veil had been lifted. The black-haired Jonin grinned broadly at her squad and said, "Good, all three of you came. By the way, you were certainly fairly early, still more than 30 minutes till the exams start. Any special reason for that?" Without hesitation, Hinata responded to their teacher's question, "Aren't you the one who always says, 'Life punishes those who delay'?" Kurenai ruffled the three genins' hair lovingly and began to slowly leave, saying, "Seems like I left quite the mark on you." Even though the woman had a smile on her face, her team was truly something else. "You will do me proud, I am sure of that. Now go and give them hell." Naruto stepped forward and pushed the double door open as their sensei backed away. He went into the examination room with Shino and Hinata, but the space wasn't quite right. There were 10 to 15 rows of benches in the large hall, with a central aisle separating each seat and leading straight to a black board at the front of the space. The room was nearly empty at the moment. Two other Konoha squads were already patiently waiting, so Team 8's genin weren't the first to arrive. The 6 male shinobi were at least 3 or 4 years older than Shino, Naruto, and Hinata, and none of them were recognized by any of them. Additionally, after giving them a shrewd look, the 6 seniors stopped focusing on the recently arrived rookie squad. The 3 children silently made their way to the closest vacant bench row and took their seats. Since this was a good chance to observe the other candidates, the genin kept their eyes fixed on the double doors. Teams from Konoha, Suna, AIM, Kusa, Taki, and even one from Otogakure gradually crowded into the room over the course of the following 20 minutes. However, Team 8's silent observations ended nearly immediately after Asuma Sarutobi's team took the stage. Ino Yamanaka dragged her 2 teammates with her as she marched towards the seats of 3 genin after spotting Naruto and giving him a menacing glare. In front of the Jinchuriki, the platinum blonde girl paused and gestured accusingly. Her voice was filled with anger as she asked, Did you even know what you did to us?" Before the realization set in, the blonde boy glanced to his left and right before pointing to himself with his right hand. Naruto couldn't understand why the girl was upset and what role he played in it. "You mean me? Don't have any idea what I should have done to you. Haven't seen you since the day we became genin." The young Kunoichi was loudly complaining about her issues with the Uzumaki boy. "You idiot just had to get lost during your first mission away from Konoha. As soon as you were declared missing, Asuma Sensei trained us into the ground every day. Afterwards I always looked like a wreck." Naruto was not pleased that he now understood her behavior. His face took on a severe, icy expression, and when his blue eyes met Ino's, the girl shuddered a little. "Yamanaka-san, you should be thankful that your teacher took his job seriously, or would you rather like to die a violent death because you weren't prepared for the harsh shinobi lifestyle?" The 2 blondes' argument had already drawn some attention, and Team 8 and 10 were the targets of the closest genin's looks. In such a competitive setting, you would typically try to avoid this, but once something is done, it cannot be undone. At this point, damage control was limited to a certain extent. Her teammate Shikamaru Nara stepped in before the girl could respond in a domineering manner. After he finished speaking, the boy took an empty seat, propped himself up on the desk, and fell asleep. "As troublesome as it is, Ino, you know he is right. The whole training was such a drag, but it should help to keep us alive, especially during this strenuous exams. Later, the Yamanaka girl sat down next to her already drowsy squad member and apologized grumpily to Naruto. After giving Naruto an apologetic nod, Team 10's third genin, Shoji Akamichi, followed his friend's lead. After the minor disagreement was resolved, Team 8 could keep an eye on the other incoming shinobi. Ultimately, it was always beneficial to be aware of your competitors. In comparison to the group of rookie ninja who had graduated from the academy this year, nearly every other participant was at least a few years older. Although there were some younger ones among the competitors, they were scattered here and there. A group from Sanagakure were the most prominent arrivals. A blonde girl with 4 ponytails and a fan strapped to her waist, a small, red-haired boy with a gourd on his back, and a black-clad, hooded boy with purple face paint and a large wrapped bundle on his back make up this ensemble. Everyone in his vicinity scooted away as a result of the redhead's rather potent aura of murderous intent. He was silently followed by the other 2 Suna nins. It was obvious that those 3 stank of trouble, a lot of trouble. Hitaki Kakashi and Maeda Guy's squads were among the final teams to enter the room. Occasionally, Sasuke would silently glare at Neji, Lee, and Tenten, but they either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. Clearly, before they came here, there had been some sort of interaction between these 2 groups. Ino jumped up as soon as she realized her Sasuke-kun had arrived, and it appeared as though the blonde girl would rush to him, but she stopped after taking the first 2 steps in the direction of the Uchiha boy. One might notice something intriguing if they were to examine the entire scene closely enough. From the Nara boy to his Yamanaka teammate, a tiny shadow stretched. The boy, who seemed to be sleeping, said in a muffled voice, "We don't want any more attention on us, Ino. So be a good girl and sit down again, you can pester the love of your life another day." The shadow moved away as soon as the words were said, and the platinum blonde Kunoichi took her place. Despite promising that her indolent teammate would pay dearly once this was all over, she had a furious look on her face. Shoji gave the irate girl a shoulder pat. The fat boy held the bag of potato snacks in front of the blonde, but she gently pushed it away, saying, "Shikamaru is right. Come on, you can have some of my chips." The exam could begin at any moment. The allotted time had already passed. Genin teams from various hidden villages were fairly evenly distributed throughout the hall. There was loud chatter coming from various groups of young shinobi throughout the room. Then everyone's attention was drawn to a smoke explosion close to the blackboard. A deep, manly voice cut through the apparent tension in the room from the white cloud of fume. "Quiet down, you worthless bastards." A cluster of roughly 15 leaf shinobi emerged from the rising smoke. A tall, ominous-looking man with 2 long, diagonal scars across his face, a black trench coat with a high collar, and a bandana-style headband stood in front of the bulk. This wasn't the only disruption in the room, though, as 2 Konoha ninja had unexpectedly emerged in leaf whirls behind the group of Chunin hopefuls. Those 2 stood directly in front of the double doors and securely locked the sole entrance. Not that anyone paid much attention to this. Most genin's attention was still solely on the front. The man in the black trench coat said, "Thanks for waiting." After a few seconds, he resumed his monologue, saying, "I am Ibiki Morino, commanding officer of Konoha's torture and interrogation force and the head examiner for the Chunin selection exam's first test." He hardened his eyes and gazed coldly at the group of genin in front of him, saying, "Those pigs who disobey me will fail immediately. Do I make myself clear?" Many of them began to perspire profusely and tremble in terror of what awaited them as a result of his introduction, the tone of his voice, and the stern look he gave the genin. By this point, it was obvious that the test's first step would not be enjoyable. Ibiki held up his hand and showed the gathered genin a card with the number 1 printed on it, saying, "Instead of the current seating arrangements, you will pick one of these tabs and sit in the seat assigned to you. We will then hand out the written exams." Although Naruto maintained his composure, he was beginning to feel a little panicked. Is it really a paper test? When he was still in the academy, he had sucked at those. It had no assistance. He had to give it his all because his team relied on him. Surely it couldn't be that difficult? After forming a line, the genin drew a card with a seat number on it. Everyone was seated on one of the benches once more after a short while. Nevertheless, the examiners had done a good job because no genin was seated near a teammate. In front of the Chunin hopefuls, the tests had already been distributed, lying face down. Ibiki Morino then spoke to the genin in front of him once more, saying, "Don't turn your tests over. Listen closely to what I'm about to say. There are many important rules to this first test. I will write it on the board while I explain, but questions won't be allowed, so listen closely." Now every young shinobi in the room was focused on the man. Everyone was paying close attention to all instructions because nobody wanted to fail. The head examiner wrote this explanation on the blackboard in brief. The first rule. You guys will all start off with 10 points. The test is made up of 10 questions and each one is worth 1 point. For every wrong question 1 point is subtracted. The second rule. This is a team test. Whether you pass or not will be determined by the combined effort of you and your teammates. A few genin began to whisper, and it appeared that some of them were ready to protest or just ask a few questions. Because of all the quiet ramblings, the noise level in the room was gradually increasing. Ibiki's firm response instantly put an end to any complaints. Shut up, didn't I say no question? Anyone already want to fail? The third rule is that during the exam anyone caught by the testing officers doing sneaky activities, namely cheating, will have 2 points subtracted for every offense. The atmosphere in the room changed as the head examiner continued to explain the genin. By this point, there was a great deal of tension among the participants, and many of them were really shaken. Ibiki shifted his hard gaze from one side of the room to the other, scanning the entire group of Chunin hopefuls. And the final rule. Those who lose all their initial points or have 0 and less points in the end will be failed along with their 2 teammates. Now begin. Calmly, Naruto flipped his sheet over and began reading the questions. After reading the entire sheet in 2 minutes, a frown was permanently etched on his face. Was this a joke of some sort? With the aid of his shadow clones, the blonde boy had learned all the material that the academy had taught its students over the previous month, but he was unable to respond to even one question. Clearly something was wrong here. The test included challenging mathematical problems, challenging cryptograms, and even a question about a diplomatic dispute between 4 rival parties. Finally, the paper mentioned that they would only receive the 10th question from their examiner 15 minutes prior to the test's conclusion. Naruto suspected that the test was more complicated than it first appeared. Deidara had told him what? Always consider the wider picture. Flashback in front of the former Iwagakure ninja, Naruto stood gasping. Despite the dirt and bruises all over his body, the blonde boy assumed an impromptu stance and launched another assault on his mentor. Deidara pushed the Jinchuriki away with force after easily parrying the incoming high kick, launching the boy backwards until he struck the ground with force. The genin then slid over the loose soil for 5 more meters before his body finally stopped moving and he lost all momentum. Naruto yanked himself up from the ground angrily. The blonde had to spit multiple times to remove all of the dirt from his mouth after he stood up again. The boy's voice was venomous as he yelled, "Can't we do something else or at least let me use some shadow clones, sensei? Otherwise this is a waste of time, Datbeo." When Deidara saw how terrible the young genin's form and attack patterns were, he insisted on some taijutsu training. The blonde bomber himself tended to use long-range attacks and wasn't particularly interested in melee combat. His own hand abilities most likely wouldn't be ranked above very low jonin or good chunin. The missing nin was well aware that he was unable to enhance Naruto's forms or stances, primarily due to his own limited understanding of these topics. But he also wanted to use these lessons to demonstrate something else to his apprentice. Naruto, you call yourself a shinobi, you fight like a common street thug. Deidara made this assessment without expressing any resentment or malice. It was merely a straightforward remark about the genin's strategy. Nevertheless, the young Jinchuriki gave an angry look in return for the question. What's so wrong with my style? It worked quite well till now. When he said, you shouldn't attack your opponent always head on. Ninjas normally use feints, misdirections and other dirty tricks to their advantage in combat. Nobody ever taught you that? Deidara got a no-signal shake of the head. Stab your enemy in the back when he isn't looking. Blind him by throwing dirt into his face. Kick him into his private parts. Lie or cheat if it is to your advantage. Anything goes. Naruto gazed at his mentor and trainer in confusion. But, isn't that, unfair? The blonde bomber started laughing loudly. Reassembling himself took him nearly a minute. Deidara glared at Naruto, lecturing him. Kid, we are shinobi, not samurai. There is no honor between ninjas. I knew that Konoha likes to look like the good guys, but this is really ridiculous. Do everything to come out on top, simple as that. No rules, no restrictions. The blonde genin nodded as he took in the new information. Yeah, I think I understand. So the ground rule is, anything goes in combat? This was going to be a lengthy training session, the bomber moaned. No, not just in combat. Deidara gave Naruto an explanation of the harsh and unsavory rules of the shinobi world until the sun had set that day. Only at that moment did the blonde genin lose some of his innocence. It was both devastating and enlightening. However, always get the bigger picture was ingrained in his memory forever. It was at this point that he realized the true meaning of Kakashi's phrase, "Look underneath the underneath." Kai flashback Naruto needed to find out what was wrong because he had a suspicion that there was a problem with the entire setup and that he would never be able to answer any of the questions without outside assistance. He could only come to the logical conclusion that cheating was acceptable under Ibiki's rules. Therefore, he ought to try it. The blonde genin looked around to assess his surroundings for the first time since the exams began. In order to detect any attempts at cheating, the examiners were closely monitoring the participants. Since he could see that Shino and Hinata were both writing on their sheets, he assumed that they had figured out a way to respond to the question covertly. Their individual clan jutsu undoubtedly helped with that. The Jinchuriki was mentally going over every tactic he was aware of in an attempt to figure out how to apply one of them to his advantage. His recently obtained storage seals, shadow clones, transformation, and substitution were all out, either too obvious or completely useless. The jutsu he had begun creating after returning to Konoha was the final straw. It might work, but he had to use it at the precise moment and it was a risky gamble. He could only wait for the time being. As time went on, more and more Chunin hopefuls were apprehended while trying to obtain information. 10 teams had already been eliminated by this point, and more would undoubtedly be added in the minutes that followed. The room was filled with a perilous silence that was broken by Morino Ibiki's voice. The remaining genin raised their heads and once again focused on the head examiner as he said, "Okay, and now we will begin the 10th question." It was the very moment Naruto had been waiting for. He was observing the man in front of them, just like the other participants. However, his two hands were hidden beneath the table and were making quick succession of hand signals. His lips made an inaudible, chakra haze jutsu sound, and then the mayhem began. Wads of thick white smoke filled the room from one moment to the next. You couldn't even see the hand in front of your face because of how thick the haze was. Everyone was coughing loudly, and then the hall echoed with the sound of glass shattering. The fog began to lift as a new breeze entered the room. When the view cleared up, you could see that every window was open. 2 of them were broken, but the others were undamaged. The coughing gradually stopped, and it appeared that things had returned to normal. Naruto had a few drops of perspiration streaming down his face. To fill the room with so much smoke, he had to put a lot of chakra into his technique. However, based on the completed form in front of him, it was definitely worth the effort. I hope that at least a few of the responses were accurate. He had switched his own sheet with that of an Omegakure genin sitting one row ahead of him while everyone was preoccupied. 2 factors led Naruto to select his victim. First of all, he wasn't from Konoha, and it would feel unfair to be held accountable for a fellow Leaf Shinobi's disqualification. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the blonde could see that all 9 were filled out even though he was unable to read the boy's responses. Naruto had already been waiting for the cry of indignation to come almost immediately. "What the fuck? Someone has swapped my test with a blank one. Where are you, you little cheater?" The boy had gotten up and was desperately searching for the person who had stolen his sheet when one of the proctors pointed at him. "You are out, the same goes for your teammates." One of the figures yelled angrily as the other 2 rose to their feet. "Mubi, you idiot. How are we going to show pain? Sama are worth now." With regret, the now named Omegakure Shinobi said, "Sorry Oboro," and bowed his head as he began to move toward the exit. The addressed genin simply replied, "Just shut up," before leaving the room with their 3rd teammate, following Mubi's lead. A lone Suna Shinobi returned from the restroom and entered the room as soon as the group had disappeared. With a loud bang, everyone in the room turned back to the front. To get everyone back on track, Ibiki Morino had slammed his fist hard against a desk. The man narrowed his eyes dangerously and said, "This is where the actions are, you little shits. Now before we get to it, I would like to go over the additional rules for the last question." Everyone was clearly paying close attention now. Many were shocked to learn that the final obstacle in the first round would have stricter rules. Up until now, things had been difficult, but it now appeared that things would get worse. There was a low murmur of unease coming from the rows. These are the rules of desperation. First, for this 10th question you must decide whether you will take it or not. "Choose?" exclaimed the Sanagakure Kunoichi from the team of frightful reed heads. "What happens if we choose not to?" The T&I squad's leader stated bluntly, "If you choose not to, your points will be reduced to 0 and you fail, together with your 2 teammates." A cocky response from a different gender indicated that they would immediately accept the question. Some, however, were quiet and had already realized that there was undoubtedly a catch. As if oblivious to the cries, Ibiki went on with his explanation. "And now the other rule. If you choose to take it and answer incorrectly, that person will lose the right to take the Chunin selection exams ever again." "What kind of stupid rule is that?" Kiba Inuzuka exclaimed. leaping out of his chair with a furious look on his face. His dog, Akamaru, was barking while perched atop his head. Surely there are people who needed more than one exam to advance. After he made his rules public, the head examiner anticipated some opposition, so he wasn't shocked. With a gloomy grin, the man resumed his conversation. You guys were just unlucky. This year it's my rules. Ibiki's gloomy grin appeared to widen considerably. But I am giving you a way out. Those that aren't confident can choose not to take it and try again next time. Just raise your hand and give up, if you feel unfit to take the question. Fear swept through the room after these few straightforward statements. There was so much tension in the air that a knife could cut through it. Most of the genin were perspiring profusely, while some were trembling or shivering. Before a minute had passed, the first one held up his hand, followed by another and another. One team after another was eliminated. Naruto looked at his two teammates, and based on their body language, he could tell that neither of them was sure about the 10th question. Like the entire test, he thought there was a problem here and questioned whether their examiner was high enough in the food chain to follow through on his threat. A Konoha shinobi making such a choice would undoubtedly not be taken seriously by the other villages in particular. In an attempt to calm his own and Shino's anxieties, the blonde gave them a comforting smile. Even the stoic Aburame appeared more at ease when the Hyuga heiress saw Naruto making the gesture, though it was never easy to tell how the boy felt. The majority of the other rookies had persistent doubts about the task at hand, so they weren't doing much better. In order to save their changes for a future attempt, a few of them appeared prepared to give up this time. However, one of them had already deduced the true objective of the test and was now free to roam the room. From his position, he could see that both of his teammates appeared unsure. The boy's thoughts were mulling over the various ways that this might turn out for his team. They were not only his friends but also his comrades, and he trusted them. But at this moment, a tiny, persistent doubt entered his mind, which is one of the reasons he preferred to unwind rather than obsessively analyze everything. He didn't like the worst case scenario that was playing in his head right now. His sensei's dissatisfied expression, his mother's reprimands, and, finally, his female teammates' furious accusations, all of which were caused by the fact that he failed to do something. Although there was little chance that this would actually occur, it was a terrifying picture, and even if it meant doing something difficult at the moment, he would be damned if he had to endure such suffering. An almost bored male voice said, "A nice mind game you are playing here, Ibiki-san." When the heads of most genin turned to face the speaker, they saw Shikamaru Nara staring at their head examiner with a drowsy, indifferent expression. The boy spoke again before anyone could respond. "If I had to guess, there is no such thing as a 10th question at all. You are just pushing us to make a decision with an uncertain outcome, to see who has the guts to not back down and take the necessary risk. Why does this whole thing have to be so troublesome?" The Nara simply moaned at the end of his explanation and placed his head on the table in an attempt to fall back asleep. "First you test our information-gathering abilities with 9 questions that are far beyond anything mere genin normally know, forcing us to cheat in order to pass." The boy had completely changed the atmosphere of the room with those few words. There was undoubtedly some truth to what the lazy boy had said, and many genin were considering it. They simply had to sit out the entire event if this explanation was correct. Ibiki looked around, wondering what he should do next. His entire plan had been ruined by the Nara, and it's unlikely that any other team would fail. Therefore, extending this further would not change anything. The man's voice was rough as he said, "You are too smart for your own good, should have anticipated that from Shikaku's son though." There is a dramatic pause before saying, "Now to everyone still remaining. I congratulate you on passing the first test." The gathered genin began to cheer upon hearing those words. It appeared as though the remaining teams would suddenly burst into ecstasy. A large black object whirled through one of the open windows and fell in front of Ibiki, who was undoubtedly prepared to end their festivities if necessary. In front of the genin was a purple-haired woman dressed in a tan trench coat, a mesh shirt, and a miniskirt. There was a black banner behind her, with 2 kunai on the ceiling and the ground, respectively. Said banderole introduced herself and said she was the proctor for the next section of the test. Everyone was startled by a loud female voice saying, "You guys! This is no time to be celebrating. I am the examiner for the second test. Midarashi Anko. Now let's go, follow me." Her abrupt appearance clearly shook everyone in the room. Only Team 8, who were already familiar with some of Anko's eccentric tendencies, appeared to be largely unaffected. Naruto even gave her a thumbs up and a cunning smile for her amazing entrance. The head examiner spoke somewhat grumpily as he came out from behind the banner. "You're early, I wasn't quite finished yet." Skillfully ignoring his statement, the purple-haired woman began to grumble. Anko briefly went into thought mode before a smile came to her face. "Ibiki. You left 30 teams? The test was too easy this time, she exclaimed. That's fine. I will just cut them in half in the second test. When it was revealed that over half of the young shinobi who had just passed the first section of the test would fail the subsequent section, they all became cautious. Meanwhile, the special Jonin's smile grew even wider. Scratch what I said before, not even 30% of you will make it through the forest of death. I will make sure of that. And then she began to giggle. Description of Jutsu Chakra Haze Jutsu is its name. Ranking. B rank category. Supplementary Shadow Clone Seal Right Pointing Arrow Ram Right Pointing Arrow Snake Right Pointing Arrow Tiger Right Pointing Arrow Shadow Clone Seal using hand seals. Momochi Zabuza's Hidden Mist Jutsu, as reenacted by Naruto. Similar to the smoke produced when a shadow clone dispels, this technique releases dense clouds of raw chakra. The jutsu is more chakra intensive than the one it was based on because it uses pure chakra to create a manifestation rather than water. The remaining 90 Chunin candidates were already gathered in front of their second challenge, not even 30 minutes after the conclusion of the first exam. The group of genin were now staring at a striking chain linked fence that towered directly in front of them after Anko had guided them past the most frequently used training grounds and away from the academy and village. The barricade was nearly 10 meters high, and a huge jungle-like area started immediately behind it. The trees could only be characterized as enormous, and based on their size, they were all undoubtedly at least a century old, if not older. Dense moss covered many areas of their barks, and vines as thick as an arm hung from their tall branches. The proctor's voice jolted the majority of exam takers out of their reverie as they stared in wonder at the scene in front of them. When she was done, the purple-haired woman smirked mischievously, which, combined with her earlier statement, made some of the current young shinobi shudder in terror. You will soon find out why it is called the Forest of Death. The special Jonin shoved her hand into her trench coat and began to fumble around a little before she eventually pulled out a stack of papers. Now before we start the second test there is something I have to pass out. Most of the genin in the group had a curious expression on their faces as they all looked at the purple-haired woman in confusion. Why did their examiner pull out a bunch of sheets when this was obviously not another written exam in that type of environment? The proctor went on to explain, you must sign these agreement forms. There were now low murmurs among the participants, almost like they were asking, why? Anko then began to laugh uncomfortably as he said, there will be death in this one, and if I don't have you sing these papers it will be my responsibility. She pointed over her back to a stand manned by 2 male chunin, saying, I'll explain the second test, then you can sign it afterwards. After that each team can check in at the booth behind me. She then handed the stack of forms to one of the genin around her and said, okay, now let's get started with the explanation. In short, you will try to survive. Anko pulled a map out of one of her pouches and unfolded it, saying, first, I will explain the area in which it will take place. The genin surrounding the examiner were closely examining the rough map the woman held out to them. Training Ground 44 is divided by a river, in its center is a tower, and because of its circular shape the distance from one of the many entrances to the tower is almost exactly 10 kilometers. The special Jonin made a brief dramatic pause before continuing, saying, during the survival in here, you will be asked to complete a certain task. Using your many weapons and jutsu you will compete in a no-rules scroll battle. The competitors' rows echoed with a chorus of scroll. Anko showed them a black and white scroll with the kanji for earth and heaven written on it. Yes, you will fight over these 2 scrolls, the heaven and earth. The purple-haired woman now grinned at them almost ferociously, saying, there are 90 people left, which means 30 teams. Half of you will receive a black, the other half a white scroll. Now because Ibiki couldn't decimate your numbers enough, I decided to make the whole ordeal a bit more interesting. To pass you have to reach the tower in less than 120 hours. Exactly 5 days. Furthermore you need 3 scrolls in your possession. 1 earth, 1 heaven and the last one, well it doesn't matter which one you have as third. The group of Chunin hopefuls sounded various cries of indignation. Complaints concerning the length of time, the location, or the way they would be provided for during the challenge are included. Anko was about to leave when she realized she needed to finish her explanation. The forest is full of food. Just watch out for man-eating beasts, poisonous insects, and well many plants in there are either carnivorous, toxic, or both, she said. She raised her hand and began counting with her fingers before saying, now I will talk about what will disqualify you. She was about to wrap up her explanation when she realized a key detail. First, those who don't make it to the tower with 3 scrolls within the time limit. Second, only complete teams are accepted. You lose 1 teammate and you are out. Third, the only way to leave the forest during the test is through the tower. Otherwise, well, I am sure you know the consequences. Anko noticed that some of the group wanted to know why, so she responded before anyone could ask, further delaying the discussion. One more rule. You mustn't open the scroll till you make it to the tower. A Chunin will be asked to handle classified information. This is to test your trustworthiness. The purple-haired Kunoichi turned around and stepped away from the genin, but then abruptly stopped. That is if for the explanations. Exchange your 3 forms for a scroll. Then choose a gate to get ready for the start. Glancing over her shoulder, she resumed her conversation. After saying, a final word of advice, don't die. The unique Jonin left without turning around. Soon after, a line had grown in front of the booth where the teams that had already completed their forms were located. Other genders continued to read the paper that their examiner had distributed or simply kept a close eye on the competition. Since only one group was permitted entry to the stall for the exchange and the interior was hidden by curtains, it was impossible to determine which team had received which kind of scroll. Team 8 stood somewhat apart from the majority of genin. Each of the 3 had completed the waivers and was merely awaiting the appropriate moment to submit them. With her eyes focused on the booth, the Hyuga girl silently tapped her forefinger against her temple. Naruto shook his head. He knew exactly what she was trying to say. No need for the hassle, Hinata. Save your chakra, not like it would give us any advantage if we knew how the scrolls are distributed among the other teams. You can always use your Byakugan during the test to determine which one our adversaries have. The blonde Jinchuriki allowed his gaze to wander freely as he watched the other groups that were taking part. The majority of the remaining genin were from Konoha, and although they would typically be their esteemed allies, given the circumstances of the second test, they were now adversaries. In other words, every man or better team was for himself at the moment. His eyes strayed over those around him before settling on Team 7. His first squad, his old teammates, it was almost nostalgic. The final member of a once proud clan was Sasuke. In their academy days, the black-haired boy was the prodigy and the best, while the blonde was the loser and the last to die. The Raven was always someone the Jinchuriki aimed to outdo. He also wanted his acknowledgement when they joined the same team later. However, Naruto was viewed by the Uchiha as merely an obnoxious bother who stood in his way, which greatly enraged the blonde at the time. Additionally, he nearly attacked Sasuke the last time he saw him. To put it briefly, they had a very challenging relationship. Naruto's favorite girl was Sakura. He and the pink-haired girl were social outcasts when they first started the academy, but for very different reasons. But after she and Ino became friends, she gained popularity, something the Jinchuriki had always desired for himself. She was also very intelligent, and the blonde always thought unusual hair colors were fascinating. His intense infatuation with her is the result of all those factors. Now that he had been away from the pinkette for a while, he was also able to notice the majority of her shortcomings. All the minor details that he had previously overlooked. Even though Naruto's feelings had diminished over time, he wouldn't say they were gone. His replacement, Kiba, came last. The blonde only knew the Inuzuka as a friend. Back in the academy, they had skipped class together a few times, and the brunette had assisted him with a few practical jokes, but that was about it. Otherwise, they were never truly connected to one another. It appeared that the new Team 7's dynamic was more harmonious than it had ever been while he was still a member of the group as they stood and conversed. Naruto glanced to his left and right, observing Hinata and Shino, who were standing directly next to him. Even after telling them about the Kyuubi that was sealed inside of him, he was welcomed by both of his new teammates. A tiny, sincere smile appeared on the blonde's face, and he assumed it was all for the best. When Sasuke turned his head and his dark black eyes met bright blue ones, the Jinchuriki wanted to give his old teammates one last look. The Uchiha's face remained expressionless, but his dark eyes seemed to be peering right into Naruto's heart. The dark cold tone of the Raven's eyes changed to an obnoxious red from one moment to the next. In both orbs, two Tomo were hypnotically spinning. The blonde could sense that his hearing was becoming hazy and his surroundings were becoming blurry. It was easy to determine that this was a mild form of genjutsu. Normally, it was best to start using this technique right away, but at the moment, Naruto was curious about what Sasuke hoped to accomplish with this small trick. In the Jinchuriki's mind, the Uchiha's voice roared angrily, "You and me, in the forest. Then I will show you who is the superior." In an instant, everything was back to normal. Similarly, Naruto's hearing and vision were both sharp and clear once more. The Raven had already turned around and was no longer directly facing him when he turned to face Team 7. To get his thoughts straight, the blonde shook his head to the left and right. There had to be more to this than imagination. He raised his voice and spoke because there was nothing else he could do at the moment and other, more pressing matters required his focus. "Come on, we should get going to hand in those forms." 10 minutes or so later, Team 8 was waiting for the second exam to begin in front of one of Training Ground 44's numerous entrances. Shino had secured the Earth Scroll they had obtained in one of his pouches. As they stood there, Sakura, Kiba, and Sasuke went by. And the blonde's belief that the Uchiha would attack them once they entered the Forest of Death was reinforced by what appeared to be a minor coincidence. Naruto was never one to back down from a challenge, so if he wanted a confrontation, he would get one. Anko shouted, "The second test of the Chunin exams now begins," and could be heard for kilometers. Following the opening of the gates, each team set out on their adventure into the unknown. An irate voice said, "Inuzuka, are you sure they are here? We are barely 200 meters away from their entry point. Don't you ever doubt Meyer Akamaru's nose, douchebag." A barely audible mutter was used for the final two words. "I still don't get what your problem with the dead last is," Sasuke said calmly, but there was a tinge of rage in his voice as he said, "That is only between him and me, it doesn't concern you, dog boy. You two just care about the Hyuga and the Aburame, Naruto is mine." Sakura was a little alarmed by the Uchiha's actions. "We know Sasuke-kun. In fact, this is all you talked about since you heard about the exams." The Raven's obsession was the opportunity to battle the blonde Uzumaki. Nevertheless, the Pinkette had no idea why Sasuke needed this so badly. Why would he need to beat up the worst student to prove himself when he was already the Rookie of the Year? She was startled out of her thoughts by Kiba's voice. The Inuzuka gestured with his fingers to three individuals standing in a small clearing no more than 50 meters away. "See, there they are. Now happy, moody boy?" he asked. It was obvious that Team 8 had been anticipating the arrival of the other three genin. With a huge sarcastic grin fixed on his face, Naruto asked, "Really want to fight me that bad, Teme?" The Uchiha hurried forward with a kunai in his hand, prepared to draw first blood, without even honoring the question with an answer. The Raven's actions were followed by his two teammates. Kiba and Sakura trailed him by just a few meters. In the meantime, Team 8 members were gathering chakra and forming a ram seal with their hands. 3 tiny explosions rocked the ground a moment later. Dust and dirt were in the air, and patches of grass and earth were flying everywhere. The 3 attacking genin were knocked off their feet and pushed several meters back by the mediocre blast wave. Sasuke's expression conveyed his anger, while the brunette and Pinkett appeared visibly shocked by what they had seen. How could he have been duped by such an easy trick? Although the dust cloud was seriously impairing his vision, he had activated his bloodline limit almost immediately. As Kiba got up off the ground, he looked to his left and right and saw that his teammates and his devoted dog companion were almost unharmed, but it appeared that they had greatly underestimated their opponents. Being close to those loud explosions must have made his sensitive ears ring. He began shaking his head to get rid of the unwanted noises that were taking up his sense of hearing. However, there was a low whizzing tone that was approaching. "Shuriken!" yelled the Inuzuka as loudly as he could. Sasuke leapt to the left, Kiba flung himself to the ground, and Sakura mimicked the Uchiha's movements, but chose the opposite course. A Fuma shuriken sliced through the dust far above their heads. They wouldn't have been harmed even if they hadn't foreseen the attack because the weapon was aimed far above them. There was a loud, annoying voice talking. "Who is the dope now, Teme? And you call yourself Uchiha? Falling for such simple tricks, you are a joke." Almost instantly, the Raven sprang into action. With the same kunai from earlier still firmly gripped in his right hand, he leapt to his feet and ran in the direction of the speaker. Sharingan was blazing, his face twisted in fury. The boy was certain that he would never, ever allow the blonde fool to ridicule him. Kiba's interjection, "Wait, Sasuke, we need to stay together," was ignored because the black-haired teenager was most likely already too far away to hear it. The Inuzuka's focus shifted to his surviving teammate. He needed to ensure that they would at least stick together. Through the woods came a male voice that was sickly sweet. "Sakura-chan, I have a present for you." This statement was followed by some loud laughter. "Ino said you would really like this. Some nice polish for that enormous forehead of yours. Come and get it, Datbeo," is what was said. A screech that was deafening was heard later. Like Sasuke before her, an angry Pinkette yelled, "Naruto!" and rushed to find the Jinchuriki, beating him to the ground for that foolish comment. Kiba was the only one left behind. The brunette boy wasn't sure if he should follow Sakura or Sasuke at this point. Furthermore, it was extremely perplexing to see Naruto in 2 different locations at the same time. The third time he heard the same voice, his thoughts were interrupted. "Now it is just you and me. Come and get me, Teme." This voice was making Sasuke go crazy, so he gritted his teeth. He ran through the woods as fast as he could to find the offender. He had just landed in a small meadow after passing another massive tree. but he came to a complete stop when he noticed the one who was constantly making fun of him standing directly in front of him. "You didn't await this, did you, Sasuke-san? Because you look clearly confused." The voice of the person directly in front of him was as loud and annoying as that of his old teammate. The only issue was that he wasn't Naruto Uzumaki. His Sharingan gazed fixedly at Shino Aburame's form, unable to pick up even the smallest indication that his counterpart was undergoing a transformation or using genjutsu. What was going on here? Maybe an explanation is needed here. The blonde Jinchuriki still sounded like the person in front of the Uchiha. He explained in his typical stoic and somewhat monotone voice that this person was, in fact, Shino. "This is a subtle little deception Kurenai Sensei taught us. With the application of a small amount of chakra to your vocal cords, it is possible to imitate the speech of somebody else. Quite useful, as you can clearly see." Sasuke sneered at his opponent, saying, "Okay, I'll deal with you first, and then I can go for Naruto. Hopefully you at least give a good warm-up, Aburame." He needed to release some pent-up anger, and the bug user was a perfect target for that. The Uchiha sprang into action one moment after another. The black-haired boy continued to race straight toward his opponent while holding the kunai in his right hand. The Raven hurled 3 shurikens straight at Shino with his free hand. The fact that the Aburame boy showed no sign of dodging the projectiles was something the attacker had not anticipated. After striking their target directly, the 3 throwing weapons flew straight through it and sank into the tree behind it. As the clone slowly disintegrated, a swarm of insects rose into the air. The attack was immediately stopped when Uchiha flicked his wrist, sending the kunai hurtling in the direction of the horde of insects. He needed his hands free for what he needed to do now, even though he was well aware that the weapon would be useless. As he hurried through a series of hand seals, his quickly rotating Sharingan eyes searched the area for the true Shino. Kaden. Phoenix Sage Flower Jutsu. As the boy released his breath, 7 tiny flame projectiles emerged from his mouth. The horde of insects in front of him attempted to disperse, and although the fire technique prevented the majority of the damage, a few hundredth of them were reduced to ashes. Though Sasuke couldn't afford to waste much time on this battle, the threat posed by the Aburame's insects had been temporarily neutralized. The longer the conflict lasted, the better the bug user's chances were. He fired another volley of shuriken after becoming interested in a movement to his left. Shino was only able to avoid the approaching attack with a swift dodge, and he then fell to the ground. He spoke in a serious tone as he got himself up off the ground. "The abilities of your famed eyes are really astonishing, Sasuke-san. I didn't expect that you would be able to detect me so easily." Rather than getting a response, the boy had to dodge a fresh round of throwing stars that his opponent threw at him. Tens of thousands of insects appeared from the Aburame's sleeves, creating a dense wall of insects between the two opponents as he raised both hands in Sasuke's direction after he had recovered from the evasive maneuver. The move was nearly immediately countered by the Raven. Kaden. Great Fireball Jutsu. The Uchiha's mouth ejected a spherical ball of heat that was roughly 2 meters in diameter. However, neither the swarming black mass in front of him nor his counterpart was the target. A flaming explosion rocked the forest as the technique struck the ground between the two genin. The scene appeared to have barely changed after the dust had settled. The Uchiha boy was on one side, and Shino Aburame, surrounded by a cloud of flying insects, was on the other. However, a closer look showed that they were almost twice as far apart. In addition, there was a tiny crater between them, grass that had burned, and a few tiny flames scattered around the impact. This time, the attack was initiated by the bug user. He threw both of his kunai in the direction of the Uchiha. The bladed weapons whirled in Sasuke's direction. In each of his eyes, Tsutomu whirled quickly, intent on the impending danger. However, something was wrong. His vision was blurry, and he occasionally saw afterimages. The second spinning blade nicked the Raven's shoulder, but the first one he managed to avoid. Even though it was only a minor flesh wound, a standard attack should not have been able to harm him with his Sharingan activated. Why did his eyes deceive him? Though he could never have been caught in one, it was almost like genjutsu. Any attempt would have been detected by his bloodline. Sasuke was startled out of his thoughts by a bothersome feeling on his neck, and he realized what had happened at once. A clever scheme, Aburame. I nearly missed their presence. The Raven now grinned knowingly. He searched one of his pouches before taking something out. "Letting a few of your insects inject chakra into me to affect my eyesight. But your plan was foiled." In his right hand, Sasuke held a double-edged chakra blade with the Konoha symbol engraved on the hilt. When he raised the weapon above his head, sparks flew from the blade and a crackling sound broke the stillness. A powerful electric discharge rushed through the boy's body with a loud crack as he focused even more lightning chakra into the chakra, conductive substance. But the Uchiha was not yet complete. He began throwing a flurry of shuriken with his left hand while using his right. Shino made every effort to protect himself from the approaching metal storm. With a kunai in each hand, he blocked and parried as effectively as he could. Nothing had struck him yet, but there were already a few of the throwing stars protruding from the bark of the tree behind him, and there were roughly 10 of them scattered across the ground. But all of a sudden, the assault ceased. At that moment, the Aburame noticed a slight shimmer in the surrounding air, but it was too late. Raiden. Shocking perimeter jutsu. As the electricity from the technique rushed over the ninja wire towards its target, there was a loud cracking sound. A muffled scream and then a simple thud were the next sounds, and then there was silence. Standing over his fallen and charred foe was Sasuke. Centimeters above Shino's head, poised for impact, was the handle of his chakra blade. A precautionary measure to ensure that the Aburame was permanently incapacitated. He refused to let any further intervention derail him from his original objective. An angry Sakura was stomping through the forest, thinking only of a blonde boy who annoyed her and what she would do to him if she managed to get her hands on him. The only issue was that she abruptly found herself facing a certain girl with blue hair in place of Naruto. She yelled at her counterpart, "Where is he? Where is the Baka Hinata?" with hatred and rage in her voice. When she was done talking, the Hyuga heiress gave the pink-haired Kunoichi a very sweet smile. "Please calm down, Sakura-san. Naruto-kun isn't here, it is just you and me." The Haruno girl was initially just perplexed, but after she had collected herself and considered the circumstances, it became more evident what had transpired. She yelled, "You tricked me," with surprise and pointed accusingly at the other genin. Since a fight was now inevitable, Sakura shuffled backwards slowly to put some distance between them. The Kunoichi never dared to turn against her opponent during this time. In the meantime, Hinata had carefully eyed her adversary and activated her Byakugan. The other girl appeared to know enough about the Hyuga to stay out of close quarters. Since the heiress was so good with Senbon, it didn't really matter to her. The brunette started shooting steel needles at her fleeing adversary with fluid motions. 3 of them were directed at the target with the pink hair each time she flicked one of her wrists. Sakura's left arm and leg began to sting, and she wasn't really sure what had happened. However, she was able to quickly jump and hide behind one of the large trees before more damage could be done. She could inspect the damage after she was safe, as all 7 senbon were protruding from her limbs. Repressing the urge to yell or sob, the pinkette pulled them out and promptly covered the punctures with bandages. She was fortunate to have learned first aid and some fundamental anatomy from Kakashi Sensei. But now would be a good time for the additional medical training he had promised her. Her bloodline gave her a perfect view of what the other Kunoichi were doing, and Hinata was prepared to attack again as soon as the girl emerged from behind her cover. "Come out, Sakura-san. You can't hide from my eyes." After receiving temporary medical attention for her injuries, the Haruno girl began formulating a strategy. Her opponent was obviously very dangerous, both at close range and at a distance. Sakura had to be more difficult, that was the only possible explanation. The pinkette threw 2 smoke bombs at the girl with the blue hair before she left the protection of her cover. Additionally, she created roughly 10 illusionary duplicates and began throwing even more fume grenades once she was back in plain sight. Then, flanked by her copies, she charged at her target with all of her strength and speed. Normally, neither of the 2 distractions could deceive the Hyuga clans all seeing eye, but when combined, they were at least a useful diversion. To dispel the bothersome illusions, Hinata automatically threw her senbon in a broad arc. After both hands were empty, she prepared for a close quarters battle. The pinkette had been struck by a single metal spike just above her left elbow, rendering nearly her entire arm useless. When she emerged from the smoke, she threw a powerful punch at the Hyuga girl, arching her right fist back. So far, everything has gone as planned, despite the brunette's attempts to block. Sakura halted the entire attack halfway through and made a swift sidestep. Then she firmly grasped her counterpart's shoulder with her right hand. Demonic illusion. Hell viewing jutsu. The girl with the pink hair incessantly infused the enemy with a small quantity of her chakra. The genjutsu should be able to resist the Byakugan in this manner, hopefully. However, it appeared to be effective for the time being because Hinata became rigid and unresponsive as soon as the technique began to work. Her eyes flashed through various images. Hundreds of shuriken and kunai pierced Naruto. Shino and his insects were both burned alive. Kurenai Sensei being brutally beaten to death. Finally, she and Sakura Haruno were standing next to each other in what appeared to be a forest. Even though reality was mixed with graphic pictures of her team being tortured and killed, the girl knew she needed to take action before it was too late. The pinkette had only been using the illusion for 5 seconds when she was thinking about how to defeat Hinata without using the genjutsu when she was abruptly startled out of her reverie by a voice. The Hyuga heiress slipped into a low stance, both hands poised for a leap, and declared, "You are within my field of divination. 8 trigrams 30. 2 palms. 2 palms." Both blows struck close to the stomach, and Sakura instantly stooped forward a little. 4 palms. The following 2 blows struck the left arm, which was already injured, sealing some tenketsu and making the appendage immobile for the time being. The girl who had been attacked let out a painful shriek. 8 palms. 4 forceful strikes to the opposing arm render the subsequent limb ineffective in battle. 16 palms. Aimed for 8 more points. However, Hinata had managed to avoid hitting anything important. Her sole objective was to render Sakura incapable of fighting any longer. 30. 2 palms. The pinkette's upper body was repeatedly struck by the final 16 blows, and after the assault was over, the girl sagged, unconsciously dropping to the ground. To relieve the tension she had built up during the fight, the blue-haired Kunoichi took several deep breaths. A part of her wanted to assist Naruto, so she turned her head in the direction where he was still fighting. She secretly wished she could help him, but she knew she had to stick to their original plan. Until she or her blonde teammate defeated their opponent, Shino's job had been to keep Sasuke occupied. Now that she had won, she had to help the bug user fight the black-haired teen. She made her way to the Aburame boy bearing those thoughts in mind. After 50 seconds, Hinata was racing at her fastest pace through the forest. She was able to witness the battle between her teammate and the final Uchiha after activating the Byakugan. The bug user was on the verge of losing consciousness, and the raven was poised to strike the final blow. The girl with the blue hair leapt into the clearing where the fight had taken place and aimed a palm strike powered by a Juken at Sasuke. His Sharingan was able to evade the attack because he saw the intruder coming and promptly leapt back. The girl was now standing protectively in front of Shino, and the raven gave her a displeased look. "Neither wanted I to fight you Hyuga or the Aburame. My only concern was Naruto, but it seems like I have to deal with you two first." The genin was briefly drawn in by the sound of a loud explosion that reverberated through the forest. After the dust and dirt had subsided, Kiba and Naruto were facing each other, with just a few meters separating them. The silence that pervaded the air was broken first by the dog user. "I don't have time to play around with someone weak like you. Sakura and Sasuke probably need my help against Hinata and Shino. So don't be sad if I make this really quick." The Inuzuka was well aware of what his former teammates could do in a fight. Thus, it was understandable that he wanted to get rid of the former class clown as soon as possible, even if it meant that a certain Uchiha would be furious with him. His enemy began to change right in front of the Jinchuriki's eyes. His canines began to grow, his fingernails grew longer, his appearance became more untamed and feral, and finally, a subtle blue glow of chakra encircled the genin. The brunette boy then made a single tiger hand seal and threw a food pill in Akamaru's direction. Later, the tiny white puppy changed into a human and resembled his owner exactly. Naruto himself weaved 2 fast seals before the two could launch an assault. Immediately, the 2 ferocious Kibas were surrounded by more than 100 copies of the blonde boy. However, the boy's smile abruptly disappeared. "Even if you can multiply yourself 1,000 times, it won't matter. Your simple clones can't confuse my sensitive nose. Illusions don't have a smell, you idiot." Fresh scent. Marks came to him simultaneously from multiple directions. However, the 2 Inuzuka impersonators stooped, shifted into a 4-legged position, and then acted. Both blurs began attacking the clones after colliding with the vast group of Narutos on opposite sides. But their vicious kicks and strikes went straight through the blonde copies, and the imitators disappeared before their very eyes. The attack persisted until it struck something solid, but this fact didn't stop it. Naruto's chest had been struck by one of the Kibas' clawed hands. The blow failed to penetrate the blonde, shocking the assailant. The only thing that was more perplexing was when his victim disappeared in a smoke cloud, and he felt a powerful tug around his right arm before he could respond. A second Naruto had wrapped the wild boy's limb with both hands. The blonde spun around, still clinging to the Kiba impersonator, with a swift, fluid motion. The blonde used the movement's momentum to throw the genin he was holding over his shoulder before slamming the defenseless victim to the ground. A powerful punch to the downed teen's stomach ended the entire combination. For the moves he had learned from the scroll the taijutsu expert had given him, the Jinchuriki truly owed Guy Sensei a debt of gratitude. The second Kiba had to observe the events from the opposite side of the battlefield without having the opportunity to step in and stop them. His face took on a gloomy look as the boy who had been attacked remained lying there, unmoving. The beaten victim was then engulfed in a cloud of smoke, and when the scene was once more visible, the genin was replaced by a white dog that was unconscious. The remaining Kiba were filled with pure hatred. "Now you have done it, Uzumaki. You will pay for hurting Akamaru," they exclaimed. Human-beast transformation. Terror Wolf. The young genin's body underwent significant change after the technique was applied, eventually taking on the appearance of a large brown wolf. The 140-centimeter tall carnivore bared his long, white teeth in a dangerous manner to the young puppy's assailant. The animal vanished for a brief moment. Rather, a tornado-like appearance ripped through Naruto's copy's ranks. Whereas the mixed shadow clones burst in smoke clouds, the illusionary clones disappeared without a trace. Nothing could halt the vicious attack, and everything in his path was destroyed. Within 30 seconds, all of the blondes had vanished, and the predator reappeared from the tumultuous tumult. After taking a whiff of the air, the beast looked up at the sky. Naruto stood on one of the tree's branches, watching the action below with a slight frown on his face and completely unharmed. In the meantime, the blonde was thinking about his next move. Before the fight even began, he and his teammates had exchanged information about their opponents, but Shino and Hinata were unaware that Kiba could change into something so swift and strong. He didn't want to kill the Inuzuka boy, so clone explosions were out of the question because they were just too risky. However, it needed to have sufficient surface effect and bang to hit a moving target and disable it. The only drawback was that even for someone like him, it would require a significant amount of chakra, but he had another trick up his sleeve that would be ideal for this task. Chakra Haze Jutsu. The surrounding forest began to fill with thick white fume. The smokescreen that was produced centered on the brown wolf and extended for roughly 50 meters. Now that his eyes and nose were nearly useless, the beast howled and growled in frustration. Naruto, meanwhile, had fallen to one knee and was panting. One shadow clone materialized next to him as he formed his preferred hand seal. Now, the move would not be successful unless everything moved quickly. The duplicate leapt from the tree branch and fell to the ground with complete fearlessness. As soon as he stepped into the white fume, the copy of Naruto exploded. Even though it was unexpected, the fog began to glow a vivid yellow before a larger, secondary explosion shook the forest of death. After completing the Chakra Haze Jutsu, the Jinchuriki discovered this through rigorous testing. It appeared that if the fume was condensed sufficiently thick, it would explode if a clone explosion was set off inside the smokescreen, even though the fog was otherwise fairly stable and did not react to any outside interferences. The best explanation Naruto had discovered up to this point was that a chain reaction could occur between the solid copies and the mist since they were both created from his chakra. His art only caused superficial destruction, with a few burn marks scattered here and there. The blonde remained optimistic that Deidara would approve of his latest creation because, ultimately, it was a stunning explosion with destruction as a byproduct. Kiba was lying there unconscious but largely unharmed, proving that the mild detonation had done its job. Before leaping down from the tree, the blonde genin took a good minute to recover. He landed close to Akamaru and picked up the fallen dog with care. After that, he strode over to the Inuzuka boy and set the devoted friend next to his master. He then quickly searched through the genin's possessions, but was unable to locate any scrolls, so he turned around and went in the direction of Shino and Sasuke. He found the only battlefield left in no more than 2 or 3 minutes. Sasuke and Hinata were still engaged in what seemed to be a staring contest. Byakugan and Sharingan are being set on fire. With a smile on his face, the blonde greeted the other genin by shouting, "Hello Teme, missed me?" as he entered the clearing. The Uchiha's head abruptly jerked in the direction of the voice, and it appeared as though his crimson eyes were trying to pierce the newcomer. Sasuke infused his verbal retort with as much hate and venom as he could manage. "I told you, you were my opponent, were you afraid to face me, dope?" He created a single-handed seal, and 6 shadow clones materialized all around him. "I don't know what your issue with me is, but know one thing. Team 8 stand as one. You want one of us and you get the whole package," he said. The 7 Narutos then charged forward to launch an assault. Sasuke swung the chakra blade, charged with lightning, in a broad arc in the direction of the attacking blondes. They all managed to evade the blow, but they dispersed in front of their adversary. His eyes darted between the various copies before him as the Uchiha's Sharingan spun quickly. One of the Narutos nodded his head slightly. When one of the clones moved, the Raven was poised to take action. But there was one little thing he had overlooked. He struck the ground headfirst after 2 fast palm strikes struck his back. He felt as though someone was fixating on each of his limbs after the shock of the surprise attack had passed. He looked up and saw Naruto standing right in front of him. The blonde said in a somber yet level voice, "It is over, Sasuke, and your team has lost." In a fruitless attempt to escape the grip his adversary had on him, the Uchiha started to ride. A furious, "No, I am stronger than you," he yelled. Mumbling to himself, the Raven said, "Not again, not again." Meanwhile, Naruto had had enough of this foolish mindset. He put his hand on the Uchiha's hair and gazed intently into the still red eyes. "What is your problem?" Sasuke attempted to escape once more but was unsuccessful. "You are my problem. You, the dead last, defeated the Hunter Nin back then in Wave Country while I failed miserable." It sounded more like he was trying to reassure himself than that he actually believed it when he said, "I am Uchiha, I am stronger, I know that I am stronger than you." Sasuke's hair was pulled by the blonde Jinchuriki. Naruto inhaled deeply before continuing, "Now listen to me, Uchiha. Back then it was only luck. Haku could have killed both of us if he really wanted to. You are probably stronger than me, however you are far too stubborn to accept the help of others. If you and your team worked together better you could have won, although you were too proud for that. And now you have to live with your failure. Hopefully you learned something today." A quick blow to the head of the Raven and Sasuke died. Shino was now fully conscious again after receiving support from two of Naruto's shadow clones. In the meantime, Hinata dressed the Aburame's wounds with some of her homemade medicinal cream. The original blonde moved to his allies with the scroll he had taken from the fallen black-haired genin. "I am sorry, Shino. I underestimated Sasuke and you got hurt pretty bad because of that." The bug user responded and even gave what appeared to be a faint smile or smirk. "Naruto, I had been completely aware of the endangerment my task provided. Our setup worked out and all of us are able to further participate. No irreparable harm was done." After hearing Shino's response, the blonde genin turned to face the Hyuga heiress and became noticeably more relaxed. He gave the girl a big smile and a thumbs up, saying, "You were kick-ass Hinata. You defeated Sakura and afterwards gave the finishing blow to Sasuke." The praise was almost too much for the brunette, who by this point was used to being close to her crush. She had to use a lot of willpower to keep from fainting. She began twitching her fingers in embarrassment as her face turned scarlet. Though her voice had let her down, she managed to say, th.anky.u, nn Naruto, k.kun. The blonde boy was aware that she would act that way occasionally, usually when he congratulated her or unintentionally touched her. He dismissed it as a typical occurrence, recalling Shino's advice that the Hyuga girl was quite shy. The Jinchuriki gave his clones a sign after he finished saying, "We better get going and find a safe place to set up a camp before night falls." The three of them hurried into the woods after one of them grabbed Sasuke and two more copies flanked it. With a hint of curiosity in his voice, Shino asked, "What are you doing with Sasuke-san? Because if something happens to him there is the chance that our team will be held responsible for it." "Just making sure that Team 7 won't come back for more. Remember what Anko-sensei said about leaving the forest? Well, I will make sure that the three are on the other side of the fence when they wake up." The blonde genin's face was filled with a. Then Naruto began to move, with Hinata trailing closely behind and Shino trailing behind, all while being held up by two of the Jinchuriki's shadow clones. A shadowy figure appeared from one of the trees encircling the battlefield after Team 8 had vanished from view. As the man landed in the center of the ripped clearing, a deep, sinister chuckle reverberated through the forest. "This was quite disappointing, Sasuke-kun. My hopes were much higher for you. All the effort to enter Konoha and the exams and now the whole undertaking was fruitless. Not that it can be helped now." The gloomy figure began to sink. He rotated the ring on his little finger back and forth with the thumb of his left hand. Following his final monologue, he disappeared entirely into the earth, saying, "Maybe I have to expand my horizon to find a more valuable specimen." With Shino and Naruto trailing closely behind, Hinata was now leading Team 8 through the Forest of Death, forming a nearly perfect triangle. The Aburame adopted this configuration, which could be referred to as their standard formation, as soon as they had fully recovered from the electrical discharge and were able to move independently once more. The primary benefit was that the Hyuga girl's bloodline limit allowed her to perfectly scan their environment and promptly alert her two teammates if she noticed anything fishy. In their quest for a suitable spot to establish their overnight camp, they had up until now remained near the outer perimeter. For a bivouac, a location close to the fence seemed the most sensible. The majority of other teams had most likely moved farther into the jungle, and there were only 3 sides to defend rather than 4. In other words, there was a far higher chance of encountering the enemy there than on the outskirts. They had been moving for a while when Hinata abruptly indicated that they should stop right away. "Animals, other contestants, or a good place to set up our camp, what did you find?" the bug user asked, sounding a little worn out. With her bloodline limit still in effect, the young heiress turned to face her allies. "Team 10, not too far in front of us. They are injured and seem to have lost their scrolls to another squad. With his customary stoic calm, Shino suggests, the logical thing to do now would be to support them and group together. The doubled number of genin should provide a better defense against adversaries. The blonde Uzumaki was the next to speak up. With the entire setup of the second test, the Jinchuriki currently harbored a fair amount of mistrust toward everyone, with the exception of the Hyuga girl and the Aburame on his team. Are you sure this isn't some trick, Hinata? Shikamaru is really smart and probably laid out a trap for unsuspecting teams. The brunette sounded almost like she was giving her teammate a lecture when she said, Shoji's left underarm seems to be broken and most of Ino's appendages are wrapped with bandages. There is no need for suspicions towards our comrades this time, Naruto-kun. There's no need to go all sensei mode on me, Hinata. After what happened with Tami's team, I am just overcautious, the blonde shinobi said, laughing and giving him a playful neck scratch. The kunoichi looked away in mild embarrassment after being called out in this way by her crush. In the meantime, the boy was simply perplexed as to what he had done this time to cause such a reaction. Shino was the one who broke the quiet among the small group. If you two are finished with your discussion, it probably would be beneficial if we moved towards Team 10 and informed them of our presence and intentions. A few minutes later, Nara was startled out of his reverie by a loud rustle. To make sure he would catch any intruders before they could launch a surprise attack, he had installed a dozen or so basic tripwires around the perimeter. His other two teammates, who were currently sleeping, were leaning against a large tree behind the slack boy. Because their comrade yelled into the woods, they believed that would soon change. He then tightened his hold on the kunai in his hand, preparing the young ninja to counterattack if necessary. Just stay away, we were already beaten and have no scrolls left. From the brush, three figures emerge. Easy there, Shikamaru, we aren't your enemies, Datbeo. The first thing the Nara did was groan a little. Naruto, cheerful and loud as ever I see. At least nowadays you aren't a beacon of orange. Shino intervened swiftly to defuse the situation before the blonde could respond angrily. After Hinata had seen you three, we asked ourselves if you were interested to team up for the night. Why? Because together we would be a harder target for enemies, be it human or animal attackers. Shikamaru tilted his head to the right, his lips thinned to a thin line, and it appeared as though he was assessing every situation. A few seconds later, he was fully himself again. Sure, why not, we'll make the whole thing far less troublesome. The other two Team 10 members, meanwhile, were completely awake and had listened to the Aburame's suggestion and their teammates' response in silence. Then Yamanaka, who was young, rushed in. It was more of a jest than anything else, though. You are really a lazy ass, you even want help to protect your friends? Both Ino and Naruto gave the Nara boy a displeased look as he muttered, troublesome blondes. Last but not least, Shoji listened to the discussion while keeping his gaze on the bruised Aburame. So you three were also already in a fight? He asked the other squad inquisitively. The blonde Jinchuriki replied with barely concealed pride, you betcha? We beat up Tami's team pretty good and got our second scroll. His right hand was clenched into a fist, and he had a smug smile. The blonde kunoichi yelled at Naruto, you want me to believe that you went up against Sasuke-kun, forehead girl, Kiba and his dog and Wan? She was radiating a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Believe whatever you want, gossip girl. I really don't care about your opinion. Naruto's entire demeanor changed in an instant, and he appeared to be staring straight at the Yamanaka with blue eyes. His body language and posture now seemed very menacing. Hinata placed a hand on the shoulder of her irate teammate. Naruto-kun, she was just surprised. I am sure Yamanaka-san didn't want to offend you or anyone else. Whatever. The boys simply shrugged it off, knowing that this exam was their best opportunity to prove themselves to everyone, even though he was tired of being undervalued along with his team. The Jinchuriki stood up in front of Team 10 and then spoke up once more. So what happened to you? You three all look like you were put through the ringer. Shikamaru, Shoji, and Ino were shocked by how quickly Naruto's mood had changed once more, but they were relieved that he appeared to be back to his usual self following the frightening display they had just witnessed moments before. Shortly after, Asuma Sarutobi's three subordinates were once again leaning their backs against the same tree. While Choji was narrating their story to the opposing team, the blonde girl and the lazy boy had closed their eyes. Flashback: the three genin were cautiously making their way through the dense forest. They were all quite tense following their first encounter with one of the undoubtedly deadly animals that call this area home. Just a few minutes ago, the young kunoichi loudly complained, never again, did you hear me, Shikamaru? Never again will I enter the mind of such a beast. With a lethargic and indifferent look on his face, the genius shot back, geez, calm down, Ino. It was just a big cat. Since there was no other way to stop the boisterous girl from arguing, the boy had to put up with it for the time being. He was confident that she would eventually stop talking about it. The blonde gritted her teeth and moaned, "A big cat? Just a big cat? It was a fucking tiger the size of a cow and it wanted to eat us to lunch. Why I'm even trying to argue with you, blockhead. Not like you could understand the things I had to endure while being in the beast's head." Suddenly, through the treetops, came a voice, cold and confident. "An overgrown animal will be the last of your problems, rookies. You should better have watched out where you go. Now your destiny was already decreed." From above, two figures descended and landed directly in front of the shocked children. Shikamaru quickly snatched something from his belt and hurled it in the direction of their assailants. When the object struck the ground, a large cloud of smoke began to spread out. Before the attack could continue, Team 10 attempted to take advantage of the opportunity to withdraw and reorganize. They weren't as fortunate, though. A lone figure rushed forward to attack after emerging from their side of the fume. A miscalculation on your side, Nara. A bit of reek won't stop a Hyuga. Partial expansion jutsu. Their attacker had to avoid the massive arm that was swung by one Shoji Akamichi before he could deliver a single blow. Neji leapt back a few meters to avoid the broad strike and vanished once more into the smoke cloud. Shikamaru gave his squad members a brief explanation, saying, "Neji Hyuga and Rock Lee are both close combatants. Their teammate Tenten is very versed in any kind of weapon, and most of her attacks are range." This time, the boy had truly done his research and knew a lot about each Konoha contestant. Getting all the information he required wasn't too difficult, but having a father who was the local Jonin commander had its advantages. A loud yell reverberated throughout their immediate area. "Our most youthful opponent knows us quite well. Now it would only be courteous for us to show them the fruits of Gai Sensei's training firsthand." A female voice chastised the first speaker, saying, "Indoor voice Lee. This way even the last Genin team on the opposite side of the forest will know our location." More smoke grenades caused a number of smaller explosions, and soon the entire forest was engulfed in a thick white cloud. The only sound that brought some memory of life to the hazy landscape was a constant clinking of metal. "Stay back, Lee. The Akamichi is swinging a big spiked ball chain, which also seemed poisoned. It's a rather irregular pattern. I can't find an opening, so our only option for now is to wait," the Hyuga's voice said, breaking the almost peaceful atmosphere. In the meantime, the Nara and the Yamanaka girl were standing in close proximity to one another, whispering to one another. The blonde teenager used the same hand seal she usually used for her mind switch technique after the young shinobi unfolded a windmill shuriken. Mind puppeteer jutsu. After her body sagged, Shikamaru turned around and threw the huge throwing weapon in the direction where Tenten's voice had come from. The four-bladed shuriken emerged from the smoke below her, barely missing her by a few meters, much to the surprise of the weapon mistress. In training. Considering that the attacker couldn't see her, that was a pretty impressive throw. The bun-haired girl, however, was just in time to avoid the same weapon when she heard a whizzing sound that only grew more intense. Just moments ago, the kunoichi was in the exact spot where the windmill shuriken had embedded itself. She had to give the three rookies credit for coming very close to disabling her this time, but she had no idea how they had done it. She would ensure that they would not be given another opportunity. The blonde girl returned to consciousness on the ground and shook her head, indicating that their plan had not gone as planned. Team 10 was once again vulnerable to attacks as the reek that had hidden them from their assailants was gradually fading. The three genin braced themselves for their adversary's next move. Shoji and his friends were surrounded by a somewhat protective shield as he continued to swing his large metal ball. Shikamaru held another smoke grenade firmly in his fingers, while Ino clutched a kunai in each hand. Lee and Neji hurried another attack, approaching them from opposite sides, as if receiving a single cue as the smoke rose from the ground and the three young genin were once again in full view. The Nara threw back his hand and hurled the fume grenade in the direction of the Hyuga that was approaching. Even though the taijutsu master didn't even attempt to avoid the capsule this time, he chose to hurry through it because he was well aware that the smoke wouldn't deter him. He would be able to escape the cloud without getting hurt thanks to his Byakugan. Shikamaru had hoped for precisely this. In addition to the usual mixture of ingredients, the last bomb he threw contained substances that were irritating to the eyes and lungs. His adversary was certain that he had simply employed the same attack as previously, but he was about to have a rude awakening. Neji was completely surrounded by the rising gas from the small explosion. The pain he was experiencing from trying to breathe and from his sensitive eyes was nearly unbearable, and he fell to the ground. He was completely incapacitated at the moment, and every breath was pure agony. Lee skillfully avoided the spiked, poisoned ball of doom on the opposite side. Shoji quickly jerked on the chain, but his adversary simply ducked beneath the weapon that was coming back. Then the taijutsu fanatic leapt to his feet and kicked the Akamichi in the upper body with a straight line. However, he was abruptly stopped in midair before the hit could connect. Shadow possession complete. Ino now. That is our only chance to finish this, the Nara boy exclaimed, turning to face his female comrade, but his expectations were not fulfilled. The Yamanaka girl was attempting to avoid an endless stream of metal a few meters away from him. Tenten had launched a huge barrage of weapons from far above. The blonde Kunoichi also fared fairly well against the overwhelming attack, but she already had numerous minor scratches on her arms and legs, which caused tiny blood droplets to fall to the ground. Lee noticed the black mass that was attached to him and emanated from Shikamaru. Though he still had a secret weapon, he was well aware of what the Nara's jutsu was capable of because they had been watching their prey for a while. With any luck, it would be sufficient to free him from the tight hold he was currently in. Gate of opening, open. Gate of healing, open. Before Team 10 members realized what had happened, Lee was on the move once more as a surge of power swept through the forest. The Nara's hold on him was totally overpowered by the boost from 2 of the 8 celestial gates. He appeared next to Choji for a brief moment before slamming his leg into the Akamichi. The fat boy barely managed to use his left arm to block the swift attack. However, the full force that was applied to him caused a tiny crater and sent him crashing into the earth. A second later, Shikamaru was directly in front of the green-clad ninja, poised to attack once more. That is, until the boy made a statement that prevented him. Stop. We're giving up. Kai flashback. The Akamichi wrapped up his account of their loss to Team 9 by saying, Shikamaru saved us from an even worse beating. After he gave them our scroll, they departed almost immediately. The Nara let out a loud moan. The whole exam was such a drag. And now we can endure another 4 days in this damned forest or get a tiresome punishment by the crazy instructor woman. Carelessly, Ino asked, You really fear the purple head? What is the worst she could do? All 3 genin then witnessed a strong shudder that sent shivers down Team 8's spine. With a matter of fact tone, Shino said, My advice for you is to listen to Shikamaru. You wouldn't want to know what Anko is capable of. This is an experience which you clearly should avoid. Now, the blonde Kunoichi was intrigued. She was constantly curious about new information, or as her teammates and sensei would say, she was a gossip at heart. So you know the crazy chick? Hinata's tactful response, which also served as a closing statement, was, She is a friend of Kurenai Sensei and we had some pretty hard training sessions with her. Best let's leave it at that. It appeared that they wouldn't move, but the Yamanaka girl was a little miffed that she couldn't get more of them out. Additionally, she came to the conclusion that it was probably best to heed Shino and Hinata's warnings that defying Enko's wishes was bad for their health. Shoji asked with renewed energy, So how we are getting some food in here? I am quite hungry by now. Naruto just pulled a scroll from his robe, unfolded it, and opened it to reveal a camping stove and a dozen or so instant ramen cups. Even though it was just a basic pre-cooked meal, everyone was delighted to have something without having to go hunting, and everyone was quite surprised at how well the blonde boy was prepared. However, his teammates and Team 10 were unaware that he kept the majority of his possessions with him constantly due to his living arrangements in the old Uzumaki temple and his ability to seal things away in scrolls. Just hours before the Heaven and Earth scrolls were distributed to the Chunin hopefuls, Anko was seated atop the booth. A plate containing a dozen fresh dango sticks was placed in front of the special jonin. In addition to her favorite dish, there was a bottle of juice. The purple-haired woman was about to begin her feast when a Chunin materialized in a smoke cloud close to the stall. We got some trouble, Anko. Sama. He received a furious glare from the snake mistress. Her eyes strayed to her favorite food, then back to the young man, and she said angrily, This better be important, Mizuku. You just disturbed my dango time and this doesn't fare well with me. As the Chunin said, We found bodies, 3 of them. The tension was audible. Please come with me, this is something you should see for yourself. Her subordinate instantly obeyed when Anko leapt from the booth and made a tiny hand signal that he should lead the way. The two quickly arrived at their destination, where Katetsu Higane and Azumo Kamizuki were watching over the area. Now, the 4 of them stood directly in front of the chain-link fence, observing the 3 unconscious genin's bodies leaning against it. One item appeared out of place, though, a folded note on top of the head of one of the unconscious ninjas. The Kunoichi leaned over, grabbed the piece of paper, and unfolded it. The purple-haired woman began to laugh uncontrollably after reading the contents. The 3 Chunin were genuinely alarmed by this display, which took her nearly 30 seconds to stop. Her brown eyes gleamed mischievously as she told her subordinates, You 3 can go and continue your regular patrols, I will see to those genin here. The special Jonin looked at the note again after the 3 young men had gone. It said, "They're yours. Have fun with them, Anko. Sensei." A grin appeared on the kunoichi's face, and she was powerless to stop it. She then poured some smelling salt over the children after taking it out of one of her pouches. All 3 were rudely awakened by the strong odor. It was especially detrimental to Kiba and his loyal friend Akamaru. Both made every effort to use their hands or paws to rub those terrible spices away from their noses. Sakura, meanwhile, seemed a little sleepy. It took her a few moments to realize where they were, and then she asked, "Are you sure? Why are we outside of the forest? Have we already finished the exam?" Sasuke calmly explained, "No. Sadly, the Dobi's team defeated us, and if I had to guess, then I would say the idiot had the courtesy to drop us here. In actuality, he spoke only with gritted teeth because he was more or less fuming inside." Anko spoke up before either the dog user or the girl with the pink hair could respond. Now, Naruto is the least of your problems at the moment. Can remember what I told you about leaving my forest? They were extremely alarmed by the way the second exam's instructor looked at them. Anko interrupted the Uchiha boy's attempt to speak and went on with her remarks. It appeared as though all 3 genin now wanted to object. "Just I don't care that you didn't leave training ground 44 on your own account. You are outside and you will get punished, simple as that. Shut up, I don't need your opinions on that. However, the question remains, what I am doing with you." She repeatedly tapped her finger against her chin, but then a menacing grin appeared on her face. Team 7 simply stared at the purple-haired woman in front of them, unsure of what to do. "Better start running, you surely don't want to know what happens once I catch you. Now maggots, move." She then threw multiple shuriken at them as though it were a starting signal. 3 hours later, Anko was riding a large brown snake as the reptile pursued Sasuke, Sakura, Kiba, and Akamaru through one of Konoha's many training grounds. The unique Jonin appeared to be quite at ease and only stepped in when one of the genin attempted to separate from the others. "Could you stop pestering my team? You know I need them alive?" The lazy Jonin, who was now standing directly next to her on the serpent's head, meets the kunoichi's gaze. Late as always, Kakashi. She quickly sealed her hand and threw off her call, and the snake beneath them disappeared as the 2 experienced shinobi fell to the ground with ease. Anko waved at him and left 3 exhausted genin and their team leader behind, saying, "You can have them back, I had my fun with them." The majority of Team 8 and 10 members were fast asleep, but one was wide awake as darkness descended upon the forest of death. Taking the first night watch was Naruto's voluntary offer. The blonde was currently leaning against the massive trunk of the enormous tree he was standing on, perched atop one of the higher branches. Since he was the most recovered of all of them, the Jinchuriki believed it was best if he performed this duty. In these circumstances, his almost limitless endurance and enhanced healing factor were quite helpful. 6 shadow clones were made by the blonde to aid in his reconnaissance of the area. The copies were strewn about the area, each one perched atop a different tree. Naruto wasn't too worried about undetected intruders at the moment because it was simple to overlook the entire area from their vantage points. Through the leaf canopy, the full moon shone brightly, illuminating everything with a soft, unsettling glow. The young shinobi let out a sigh and looked up at the largest source of light in the night sky. Naruto had discovered the past of his explosive, loving mentor months prior in a similar situation. Flashback with the full moon high in the sky and night already falling over the nearby woods, the 2 blonde shinobi were sitting by their almost burned campfire. Carelessly, the older one was searching through his pouches. He occasionally cursed silently because he was unable to locate what he was looking for. Before he spoke, Naruto gave his teacher a close look. "Need a helping hand, sensei? What are you even looking for?" "Something that will help you to improve your non-existent chakra control, Deidara appeared to have doubled his efforts at this point, as evidenced by the increasing rustling sounds. With little regard for his apprentice, the missing nin muttered angrily, "I know that I had them somewhere here. Come on, where are those damned things? Weren't they in this bag last week?" Something landed on the ground with a faint thump, but the bomber apparently hadn't even noticed. The young genin stooped to retrieve the item and give it back to its owner. Naruto felt cold metal that appeared to be mounted on some sort of fabric when his hands touched it. He looked down and saw that it was a forehead protector in the dim moonlight. It had the Iwagakure symbol prominently displayed, and a thick horizontal scratch was piercing the identifying emblem. With the headband still gripped between his fingers, the blond boy leapt reflexively a few meters back. Deidara looked in the direction of his apprentice. Naruto gave him a direct look, as if he had seen a ghost. Then he noticed what the young boy was still holding and said, "What is all the commotion about, brat?" Throughout the entire accusation, The Jinchuriki's voice was trembling. You're a missing nin. And not just from anywhere. You are from Iwa. A shinobi who had defected was bad enough, but an Iwagakure person was worse. Even he recalled from the academy that Stone and Leaf had a tense past together. The only response from the defendant was a loud laugh. The genin gave a slight nod, but showed no signs of relaxation. You are really funny, Naruto. If I wanted you death I could have done the deed by now, don't you think so? Not all missing nins are bad guys, and just because I was born in Iwagakure doesn't mean I kill every Konoha shinobi I see. The younger ninja's mind flickered back to Haku and Zabuza. Even the swordsman appeared to have some positive traits, and the ice user wasn't a bad person. Therefore, it was only right that he listened to Deidara's account before making a final judgment on the matter. So why did you leave Iwa, sensei? Beside him, the older shinobi patted his hand on the ground. Come take a seat, that could take a while to explain. Flashback inner in front of the boardroom, a shaky 14-year-old shinobi was pacing back and forth. He was currently debating the Tsuchikage, his most trusted advisors, and a number of other senior ninja. That young man's request was the cause. Although his previous 2 attempts were strongly rejected, this was actually the 3rd time he had brought this up before the council. As the double door flew open and the various parties departed, none of them gave Deidara a direct glance. The teenager went into the council room after the noise had subsided. Only Onoki, the Sandaime Tsuchikage of Iwagakure, remained. As he saw his leader's dejected expression, the blonde shinobi said, "They did deny me again, didn't they, in a serious and melancholy tone. The elderly gentleman looked up at his young student. The Sandaime Tsuchikage snorted before continuing, "You idiot, I told you this would be the outcome. But no, you were just as stubborn as your father Gari when he defied the council and married your mother against their wish. Were 2 times of failure not enough? Why did you think anything had changed?" The demolition expert crossed his arms and his face took on an irritated expression. "Those senile old fools had the same arguments as always then?" he asked. Deidara glared at Onoki and spat back angrily. "They fear I will grow to be too powerful and uncontrollable, or that I won't survive the implantation process?" Finally, the old leader declared, "And they are partially right. I am tired of your fruitless tries to acquire it. You are one of the most accomplished chunin of Iwagakure. If you stop to waste time with your useless art, you could be Jonin by the end of the year, and lastly you will be the next leader of our famed Explosion Corps. Shouldn't that be more than enough?" The teenager was furious now because even his mentor had denied him what was rightfully his. "The Sozukuchi, molding mouth, is my birthright. It was my mother's and her father's before she inherited it, and now it should be mine. You know, only she and her ancestors were ever able to survive the insertion and control its power." The council room was filled with the sound of creaking wood as the Tsuchikage slammed his tiny fist down hard on the table. "This discussion is over, Deidara. You won't bring this up anymore. Try again when I have retired. You can annoy my successor with this issue, but I am done. I won't tolerate any more hassle from you." Since there was no need for a response or additional discussion, this was a battle he had lost, and there was no way he could win, at least not right now. The blonde shinobi turned around and bounded out of the room without further ado. Now, the only thing the irate Onoki could do was stare silently as one of his best pupils hurried off, the big double doors slamming behind the boy. All the way back to his office, the elderly leader muttered, "Stupid council, stupid teenagers." A few hours later, the young, blonde ninja was still having fun in one of Iwagakure's training grounds. With full force, he slammed his palm against a massive stone. Katsu! A cloud of dust rose from the center of the explosion, and a thundering explosion rocked his surroundings. The explosion specialist was still standing in the same location when the view cleared up, but there wasn't much left of the boulder other than minor debris. Before being startled by a loud shout, the teenager was looking at the pieces that remained after his attack. "Deidara. Ni." The chunin looked around after being pulled from his thoughts. A girl with black hair was sprinting in his direction, but the blonde man interrupted her before she could get close. "Shouldn't you be with your sensei and team, Kuretsuchi?" The youthful Kunoichi gave him a smile. "We just finished our last mission for today, though I heard those idiots denied you again. Especially our esteemed Tsuchikage, the old, senile geezer." He couldn't help but laugh a little. "Is this your way to speak about our leader and your grandfather?" "But," playfully ruffling the girl's hair, Deidara said, "No buts here, Suchi. Chan. Anything else you come here, except badmouthing Onoki again?" The young woman gazed at the chunin with hope. "Well, I thought. You may have time for another tour through your atelier. Show me your newest clay figurines and what you are up to in secrecy." The blonde chunin pushed his right hand into one of his pouches and removed a small eagle. Then he put the miniature in the girl's right hand and said, Sorry Kuretsuchi, but not today. Here's something to always remind you of my art, so you don't have to come and pester me all the time. I hope you like it. A firm embrace was given to him before he could even respond. Thanks Ni-san. The female genin then fled, disappearing almost as quickly as she had appeared. As she departed, the kunoichi failed to notice the single tear that trickled down his cheek and the brief glimpse of an agonized expression on his face. Finding what he was looking for didn't take Deidara long after nightfall in Stone Village. He was well aware of the location of the scroll in the Tsuchiyage's vault that held the Sozu-kuchi. Since he was Onoki's pupil, it wasn't odd for him to come here, even at strange hours, and no one had thought he was strange when he first arrived. He unfolded the ancient text carefully. A single large mouth with long tongue and razor sharp teeth was found in the center of the scroll. The parasite was repelled by a number of powerful fuinjutsus. In order to survive, the Sozu-kuchi, a special kind of chakra being, required a living host. By feeding on the bearer's chakra, it grants the host the ability to directly knead their chakra into a variety of earth-based materials. The blonde shunin put the sealed mouth just above his bare skin after exposing his chest. Since this creature had been passed down through his mother's family line for generations, he was familiar with the process. Deidara felt a sharp, nearly excruciating pain as the black lines of the various sealing jutsus began to spread across his body. The process had begun when the Sozu-kuchi sank its teeth into his flesh. He had to use all of his strength to keep from yelling. After nearly 5 minutes, it was almost finished. The creature had established a direct connection to his hearth and was now embedded in his chest. There was no way to take it off as long as he was alive, and if he passed away, it would be reattached to the same old book that had held it for the previous 13 years, ever since his mother died in the Third Shinobi War. Deidara gritted his teeth because the last step of the process was approaching at any moment and it was probably going to hurt even more than what he had already endured. He sensed it immediately, as the two mouths tore through his flesh and skin, causing blood to pour from his outstretched palms. Even though he was able to control nearly all of his sounds, only a few whimpers came out of his mouth. He fell to the ground with a crash as his legs buckled under the tremendous pressure his body was under. After a period of 15 to 20 minutes, he regained consciousness and was prepared to depart from this location. He knew from the beginning that once he began this ritual, there would be no other option, so he had to leave Iwagakure. He would still be damned if he allowed those council idiots to take away his family's legacy. He exited the complex as effortlessly as he had entered it, then leapt through the night from building to building until he arrived at the outer outskirts of the city. On the edge of Iwa, the blonde, Be. Missing Nin stood atop one of the biggest towers. It was time to put his newly acquired abilities to the test. Few people were aware that the Sozu-kuchi served as the inspiration for his obsession with clay art. It was a custom that had been passed down from his mother's side of the family, primarily designed to teach the next generation how to use kinjutsu. The only significant distinction was that Deidara was the first to successfully fuse the Bakuden and the Sozu-kuchi. With his special clay strapped to his waist, the blonde shinobi had 2 pouches. He thrust both hands into them, and his new mouths got to work quickly, consuming large quantities of the earthen substance. Something spewed out of each of the openings in his hands. An enormous bird that was large enough to ride comfortably appeared from his left palm. About 10 smaller flying objects were produced by the other mouth. All creatures took off after Deidara hopped onto the largest of his clay creations. The missing Nin turned around and watched the fleeing city as his bird carried him farther and farther away after he slashed the forehead protector he was still wearing with a kunai. As a farewell gift to them, the young man made a single-handed sign. Katsu. Iwagakure was shaken out of his deep sleep by a series of explosions. That night, a number of high-ranking individuals had their homesteads attacked, and numerous people were killed in the ensuing destruction as a result of the bombing, which caused numerous buildings to collapse. Inner flashback. Since Naruto remained silent during the entire explanation, it was clear that his mentor was deeply affected by this tale. As he recounted his own treason, the blonde bomber exuded anger, sadness, regret, and a host of other emotions. With a loud sigh, Deidara gazed expectantly at his young student. What he could expect from the genin was uncertain to him. So now you know almost everything, The Jinchuriki was taken aback. It was undoubtedly a captivating story. With one hand, he scratched his neck uncertainly while tilting his head to the right. Can't say I catch your whole motivation, sensei, but I think I can somewhat understand why you did it. You only took what was yours to begin with and those jerks didn't want you to have it. Also, the old man Tsuchikage didn't help much, did he? The blonde man choked back a chuckle. You are still pretty naive, kid. That's the way the world works. Sometimes you have to deny someone his rights if it is the best for the majority. The bomber then turned around and scudded into his sleeping bag, signaling to Naruto that it was time for him to do the same. Kai flashback. The young Jinchuriki's memories ceased as he continued to stare fixedly at the full moon. Given the condition of the celestial bodies, he could easily estimate that it was past midnight by this point. Naruto decided it was best to let Team 10 and his two friends have their well-earned rest after glancing down towards the camp where they were still asleep. His unbound endurance and quick recovery would ensure that he was at nearly 100% tomorrow, so he could definitely handle the entire night shift.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.